Caitlin in a minute. She's trying to get Bob Mayer, and then Jerry will give you the heads up when we get started.
Tell them there's free food down here. I'll get that.
Hey,
I got Mayor.
is he coming? Or?
You just said thank
Not this one.
Tell them there's free food.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Please rise. This is the special meeting of the Board of Finance to take on one agenda item. We're going to ask Mr. Michelangelo to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right.
Is the machine on? I don't know if there's.
The machine?
We've got the video too.
I don't think.
Yeah. Are you all set, Jerry? Great. All right. The agenda for tonight for our special meeting is one item. To hear, conduct, and act upon a resolution appropriating $5,238,200 for the cost of certain projects to restore facilities damaged by Hurricane Sandy, and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. And the subsection under that is to hear an update on the FEMA costs. You all recall that FEMA costs or FEMA reimbursement possibilities, as well as insurance reimbursement possibilities, are a key component of this topic, which is obviously storm-related damage and restoration projects that need to be done. This was a holdover item from our meeting from last evening. We're holding this special meeting essentially at the request of DPW, Mr. Mayor, and the administration. Due to the timing of this, we want to get this before the RTM, should we approve it, or whatever we approve, or whatever we do, we want to get before the RTM so that they can act on whatever it is as we head into the spring season. So I'm going to turn it over to these gentlemen to walk us through some of the details. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for coming. I know you're coming from another meeting, and I appreciate it. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, just, I guess, a quick introduction. Storm Sandy played havoc with much of the infrastructure of the town. And the Department of Public Works personnel have, and other members of the town staff have taken inventory, have been on tour with FEMA, have identified the FEMA appropriate, what's what I'm looking for, damage that's FEMA recoverable damage, have made broad estimates, and those broad estimates were utilized to develop a bond authorization. One of the key issues here is we don't need the money now, but you don't qualify for FEMA reimbursements for money spent prior to an authorization. So the town may not spend money on anything and then expect to have that money reimbursed. So that's the purpose of having the authorization now. And with that, I'll turn it over to...
Now, there's a caveat to that, right, which is part of this, which is, aren't there some funds that were expended during the storm?
I'm talking about infrastructure mitigation, infrastructure renovation and mitigation.
Okay,
Thank you for that clarification.
right, so emergency costs that were incurred during the course of the storm, which may be FEMA eligible, those are being accumulated
Correct.
and will be submitted to FEMA in the appropriate time frame, right?
Right.
And hopefully the town will be reimbursed for some percentage of those costs.
Correct.
Right? And then these are strictly restoration projects to repair the long-term damage that was inflicted on the town by the storm.
Right. And repair and maybe even improve.
Okay. And that's what I...
By improve, I mean strengthen it so that it would be damaged less or not at all in a future storm of equal strength.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I'll turn it over.
Tom, can I ask a quick question?
Sure, please.
I'm sure you'll probably get to this, but the cost, the emergency costs that you were describing that are separate or additional to this, that will be hopefully eligible for FEMA as well. Is there a time, is that part of the reason why we were asked to move expeditiously? Thank you, I was trying to get it out. because we have some sort of time limit, look-back limit of some sort, or?
Well, don't confuse the PCB issue with the
No, I'm not-
with the
I
FEMA
think-
issue.
yeah, no.
But the first submittal due date, and I'm not, actually, I don't, and I didn't pay attention. Actually, I do have some detailed information that I could share on the update on FEMA costs. I guess I kind of made an assumption that that wasn't going to be part of tonight's agenda, but I could go get that. I think I could still find the things in my office. I thought we were just going to deal with the infrastructure issues this evening.
We're voting on the infrastructure issues, but all rolled into what the storm did overall. I think we do want to hear about the FEMA costs. So at the appropriate time, if you could grab those for us, I think we'd appreciate that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that.
So the
Oh,
20
yeah. I did say the initial submittal date is February 13th.
Yes, you did. Last week, actually. So go ahead.
So the 23 projects that you have before you tonight are going forward. So these are improvements that we'd like to undertake to restore a lot of our infrastructure back to the pre-Sandy condition. And I'll talk about each of these items and how we expect the FEMA funding to play out. Jerry Lombardo's here because obviously a lot of our structures are along the beach and our recreational type structures. Scott Bartlett is at the retirement board meeting. He should be coming down shortly. He's been with the town for 30 years, much longer than my 4 months. So he may be able to illustrate more about some of the specifics of the projects.
You
So
know,
I'll just,
we didn't have these issues before you got here.
I take full
All the
responsibility.
buildings were strong and the weather was great.
Great time.
So I'll just talk through each project individually as detailed or as not detailed as you like. Penfield Pavilion was rebuilt several years ago, or just finalized within the last year. Sustained quite a bit of damage from undermining during the storm. So most of the damage occurred when the water washed in and took sand with it. Similarly, when the tide receded, it took water, took some sand with it too. So there's basically the middle part of the building has been undermined. The foundation has basically sunk and dragged many of the elements down. Probably deformed probably about 1.5 feet in locations. So the plan to repair that, and once again, is to solicit for a design professional to address the issue. And by the issues, I mean, the structural issue of the building, the coastal issue of stopping the water from doing it again, and foundation and soils to put an adequate foundation to support it so this doesn't happen again. So once again, we have a request for qualifications, proposals for a design professional to do that for us. So we've taken a cursory look at it, but we haven't in earnest started the design yet. We've estimated a price at $1 million for the restoration, and once again, that's a pretty vague number, but the way that may play out, as many of you have heard, we have a $500 deductible on the town insurance policy. So if the insurance company does cover everything over $500,000, the remainder of it would be, if it's covered, once again, by the expected 75-25, that would be, under that scenario for $1 million, would be $125,000 cost to the town, with, once again, the two other pieces of the puzzle, FEMA and our insurance carrier providing the remainder.
Before I turn it over to board members for questions, Mrs. Alvin did, I did have a conversation with her today, and she asked one question that I think globally would get asked anyway. I want to ask it here since you referenced it, and then I'll turn it over to board members. The numbers we're seeing tonight, they're obviously estimates.
Correct.
How comfortable are we in these estimates? And are the estimates being used higher estimates, in other words, conservative numbers So that we're not saying this will cost $5 million and all of a sudden it ends up costing $6 million.
Well, they are pretty rough estimates. It's hard to estimate a construction cost when the design has not been completed yet or even started yet. So they are rough estimates. And one of the things that Mr. Mayor may discuss is that one of the ways to sort of act as a safety factor in all of these, we anticipate that out of these 23 items, and once again, if we concentrate on the larger ones, yes, some of them may come 50,000 over or 100,000 over. Some of them may come 50,000 less or 100,000 less. That is why in the proposal and the bond authorization, one of the verbiage in that request is that we hope to use the aggregate total. This way, it's almost like a blended, it gives us some insurance against insurance in case one of them goes over. Some of them will go over, some of them will go under, but on the average, we feel comfortable that the final total will come under the final total. And once again, out of our total projects, there's a 10% contingency added to the total. So between blending all the projects together and not holding each one individually to that number and the 10% contingency, we do feel comfortable that we have enough cushion that these numbers are good for this purpose right now.
Questions on that specific topic? Mr. Bartlett,
Yeah,
please.
thanks. This question actually is germane to this, but it actually applies to all 23, so it's a
Yeah,
little global.
so you go ahead.
But I think it's relevant. This goes for FEMA. I know we may at some point have, if I remember correctly, a FEMA expert being called in and so forth, or a consultant. But so if you can't answer it, that's fine. But just thinking off the top of my head as I'm listening, does FEMA, how does FEMA determine, we're coming up with numbers on these 23 projects, either individually or as a whole, right? But how do we know that FEMA will agree that, the proper cost is X for any project? How do we know they won't say, well, okay, we agree with you, you need to do that, but you're saying it's $840,000, but we think it's $490,000, and we'll give you a reimbursement off of that figure, almost like in health insurance, actually, usual and customary.
Well, these projects will be competitively bid.
Right.
So the actual construction numbers
Okay.
will be the right number. I think where the discrepancy is, and we've met with the FEMA representatives. Our project representative walked each and every one of these projects.
Right.
And I'll just the Perry Green bulkhead was one that whatever the final number is, the question won't be the construction. And that was one that our rep had some concerns about, and in looking at it, the concern was more of, well, was that damaged by the storm, or was it
Right.
through normal wear and tear?
So, okay, so what I think I'm hearing, which is giving me some comfort, is that to the extent that FEMA approves of work that needs to be done, and assuming we follow certain standards of how one goes out and bids it and so forth, like we do hopefully with all of our projects, then that's the acceptable measure for them. Whereas they don't at the end of it say, okay, here everything you did, but we still think it's only worth X. In other words,
Correct.
as far as you know, that's not the case.
Correct, yeah.
Is that? Okay.
Anybody? We'll go to Mr. Walston and Mr. Brown.
Speaking of globally, what is your, I guess, opinion in regards to the chances of us getting 75% reimbursement? I don't know, Bob, whether this is more directed to you. Is it a certain thing? Is it fluctuates? Could it be 50? Could it be 0? I'd like to know, because you're asking for a lot of money, and we're led to believe that we're getting 75%. So really, it's going to cost, you're asking for $5.2 million, but you're really kind of wink, wink, saying in the insurance portions of each one of these that there's 75% expected. So we'd only have, the town would only have to pay $1.3 million.
Even less, actually. Because there's insurance.
Oh yeah, less, because there's insurance on Penfield.
Right.
Well, if I wasn't clear last week, maybe clear today, what I'm saying about these projects is the only thing that's certain is in a basketball game, you don't come up with 2 winners. Somebody has to lose, somebody has to win. definitely not certain about that we're going to get 75%. What we are fairly certain of is that the 23 projects are all more likely than not FEMA reimbursable, which means they suffer damage from the storm. Now, we as a town, there may be one or two that FEMA might say, well, you know, that wasn't because of the storm, that would have broke anyway or something. I have no idea what process they're going to go through. But the major ones, you know, are pretty straightforward, and it's pretty obvious that they are storm damage. They follow the rules of what is required to be FEMA reimbursable, and FEMA has seen all of them. They've commented on them that they seem appropriate, but you still have to put together your project cost list. You have to put it out to bids. You have to make decisions what you want to do, and you have to negotiate sometimes. So, are they FEMA reimbursable? Probably, a high degree of certainty. Will we get 75%? I have no idea. Now, remember, the authorization that we're asking for is for the estimated full amount. But the bonding amount will be what we spend minus whatever our reimbursement is. If we get 100%, if we do get the full 75%, then we're spending, I don't have the document in front of me, $1,200,000 or something like that. Could it cost us $2 million? Time will tell.
Why would I authorize you to be able to spend up to $5 million? Because really what I'm asking from the taxpayer standpoint is, do we want to add to our bonded indebtedness to up to $5.2 million? When you're telling me that there's a high likelihood that we might not hit 75, but there's a high likelihood that we're going to get most of it.
We only bond what we use.
But,
That's
and
the practice of the town has been to, whether it's a school reimbursement, school project, whatever, we've always bonded the full cost, not the net cost. Excuse me, I misspoke. We've always authorized the full cost and bonded the net cost.
But once I authorize you to spend $5.2 million, if FEMA says we're not going to reimburse that because either we don't have enough money in FEMA nationwide for this project or whatever, you could still go ahead and spend the 5.2.
I actually don't know what would happen. Well, I know two things. I know from a management perspective that if that happened, the town would go through the list, figure out what we need and what we can do without, and what we need today, and what would be kind of schedule the repairs out over a timeline. Would not do them all at the same time. So that would be one of the management.
Well, I don't think we know that, though.
But that's not specifically your question. If for something happened, if FEMA blew up, it has been $5 million, could you guys say, don't do the work? You're going into an area of, I assume, Board of Finance gives and the Board of Finance take it.
I don't think we have the right anymore. Our bond counsel's here. What happens if that happens?
Mr. Clary, please, feel free.
I think it depends where you are in the process. If you haven't issued bonds or can spend the funds, you have the power to.
But do we? We don't, by that point.
Does us, or is the first selectman to have it?
What? I mean,
I'm talking about the Board of Finance, or Jim's talking about the Board of Finance. I mean, once we authorize it, it's authorized, it's over for us. Then it goes to the RTM if the RTM authorizes.
it's the RTM, yes.
Right.
They're
But I think we're even asking post-RTM.
That's exactly
So,
right.
because the RTM, assuming we pass this, is going to have hopefully the same concept. And I think what Jim is asking is, I mean, hopefully it's not going to happen, obviously.
No.
But its reasonable point is if for whatever reason FEMA were to give us a call and say, you know, we're really sorry, we don't like Fairfield, and you're getting zilch. And now do we have any recourse back at the Board of Finance level to say, whoa, put the brakes on this thing? and do what Mr. Mayor is saying should be done, which then would be to prioritize things and decide on what's critical and what's expendable and so forth. Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah, that's exactly.
I
Thank you.
actually, not totally positive, but my belief is once the RTM is passed, it's sort of, they're the legislative body.
So then it really becomes the first elections.
I mean, there's no,
Yeah.
right, there's no if-then statements in the current language. I mean, I mean, we've had this discussion in previous bonding resolutions where if-then statements really weren't allowed for the bond issuance, right? I mean, it was basically, it's they're either authorized or they're not authorized. So if we were to authorize this legally, they're authorized to spend $5.2 million on these items. This doesn't say they're authorized pending FEMA reimbursement. This says they're authorized, right?
Right.
I have a follow-up to it. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think that to go out to bid on a project, we need the full amount of the project authorized.
There was some question of that previously. I was going to ask you, do we need to authorize the full amount so that FEMA will consider reimbursing us? That's a question that I have. Would they consider reimbursing us even if we haven't authorized the full amount? Because I know that's the issue we have.
But I don't think we
school
can
projects.
go out to bid without having the full amount authorized.
I think you can. It's whether people will take that bid seriously and actually.
You can go out, yes, like you can sue anybody, you can go out to bid.
Right, you can ask somebody to bid on the project, but if,
But yeah.
the likelihood of them putting in a bid
Yeah.
on the project that hasn't been authorized.
Right.
You severely limit the
Yes,
pool
sir.
of who's gonna put it in.
Right.
But, can I follow up on your question though? To that point though, I'm assuming that, I'm assuming two or three things, and I shouldn't say I'm assuming, we need to get clarification. The items on here are storm-related, yes or no?
All the items on there are storm-related.
Okay. I'm also assuming that these are all critical path items that need to be done in order to return these structures or these services to a working condition.
Correct.
That is correct.
There'll be a loss of use on all of these facilities if
Okay,
left.
what I don't, and by the way, if a facility needs to be brought up to a FEMA code, if we have a code issue, I'm assuming that's taken into consideration here, and that's the improvements that are being included.
Correct. Those are what are called 406 funds.
Okay, because what I don't want to see, and this might go to something you're saying is, hey, we've got this pot of $5 million that's been authorized. We've gone out, we spent this amount, we've got FEMA reimbursement on it, but you know what? We could really put in a new lighting system in Penfield, or a new, that's not what this is. This
Any
isn't about-
mitigation that FEMA would accept would have to be mitigation to improve the durability of the facility in a storm.
I understand that.
Not to improve the ambience.
I understand that from FEMA perspective. I want to make sure that's resonant in our bond resolution as well. It's because, just because you weren't going to be reimbursed, going back to it, we're allowing you to have $5.2 million available on these specific items. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but there's already, one of them, they're already admitting that there's a change. There's going to be a change, and that's Penfield. I mean,
And I'm understanding that that's a structural change, and I think when we get to that specifically,
Mhm.
I think we should talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you see what, we're still on the global level of the 5.2 and what you're allowed to do with it, what we can anticipate back, and what the intent of this is. And I want to make sure, from my own perspective, that the intent of it is to bring these, that A, these are critical path items, B, they were all damaged by the storm, C, we're bringing them up to a working state, and D, where appropriate, we're bringing them up to the appropriate code level. And E, we're not spending more to, as you said, Mr. Mayor, or will not spend more to just do kind of the cosmetics and the ambiance, as you said. See what I mean?
Absolutely. The first sentence of number one, basically says to fund all costs associated with the projects to restore facilities damaged by Hurricane Sandy.
Mhm.
I think what you're trying to get at, Tom, if I may, is that...
Definition of restore.
Right, well, not only that, but I think that that doesn't, I don't think it's a huge problem necessarily, but that doesn't preclude what Tom's concerned about, is what I think he's trying to say.
I think it does.
You think it does?
I think it says restore. Doesn't say enhance for other reasons.
Yes, Mr. Polito.
I understand what you're saying, Mr. Mayor, but going to Penfield, what you're talking about is not putting it back the way it was pre-Sandy. What you're talking about in this particular item is improving it, not just restoring it, because you're talking about elevating it by several feet, modifying the access stairs, and fortifying the bullhead. That's above and beyond restoration, the way I understand it.
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, this might even be more limiting than we want it to be, as opposed to more broad than we want it to be.
I guess then the question for bond counsel is, the way the language currently reads in the bonding resolution, which is going to that first sentence in paragraph 1, page 1, to fund all costs associated with the projects to restore facilities damaged by Hurricane Sandy. In your opinion, would that preclude the type of improvements that are being suggested for Penfield?
Sorry, I'm not familiar exactly with the parameters of those, and the question would come down to, I think, is, are those the elevation necessary under the new codes and FEMA guidelines to keep it?
Considering the building was just put up like in the last 3 or 4 years, I would assume that was assumed to be code compliant and FEMA compliant and all of that. I don't think things have changed that much over the last year or two. I guess from a saleability standpoint of the bond, is that something we need to concern ourselves with? That particular language about restoration versus improvement?
Yeah, the Penfield restoration, elevation, et cetera, is part of a flood zone regulation.
But that wasn't the case when the building was erected.
That is a correct statement.
So it's changed in the last matter of 1 or 2 years, is what you're saying?
May of 13, there's new standards going to go into effect.
Okay,
We wanna
that's the
meet-
missing piece.
We
All
want
right.
to meet those standards.
Thank you, Mr. Polito. Let's bring that back more globally. One of the things we might want to do when we go to vote on this, and with bond counsel here, I'm happy to take suggestions as to what the appropriate language might be, is within this area, define what restore is. And if in fact it's the pleasure of the board to say, to restore to its original state, right? And/or in very limited circumstances to comply with new codes and regulations, so that we allow for that, but we very specifically call out the fact that we don't want new amenities. We want structural items. And by the way, guys, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but we have seen that happen in the past with other building projects, and I think we need to be very careful of that.
Yeah, I was going to say for a second. I'll recapture that thought. Excuse me.
Not a problem. Mr. Yeah,
Oh,
When you were
excuse me.
talking about appropriate, I was thinking that when you were reading off your 5 criterion. that
Yeah.
The 4th one was the question about the appropriate, bringing it up to code, and that was the question about.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I
please.
got so involved in listening to your wise words that I thought. God. After the last meeting, when we were amending the resolution
Right.
in the meeting, I've since then spoken with Betsy Brown, who informed me that you really don't need to have the final language voted on in the meeting. You just need to have a clear message of what the intent of the change in the resolution is voted to be.
Thank you for that. We've actually gotten into problems once in a while with that with prior and it was, after you had left the board originally, it was, we tightened up the language because we saw some issues where funds were being used within projects not as was originally intended, and they fell back on the language in the resolution to say, oh, we're allowed to do this based on the language in the resolution. So we had actually gone and tightened it up specifically for that reason. I understand what you're saying, it just hasn't been our experience, so thank you for that.
Yeah. You would have my commitment certainly to bring the draft final language to you to
Yeah.
review and pass on.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, I want to turn it back to you because we started with
Well, I
your
guess I
question.
have another question to bond counsel, and that is, if I was uncomfortable with bonding or giving authority to bond the full amount of the appropriation, because I wanted to limit the total amount we could actually put out to bond. So, say for example, it's approximately $1.2 million, we think, at least based on the administration's numbers, that we will be bonding, approximately, not the 5.2. If I wanted to limit in paragraph 2 of the bond resolution, the amount that we can borrow to say twice that, 2.4, which is a 100% increase from 1.2. Could I do that? Or could this board do it if it was our pleasure?
Yeah, well, you'd have to, you're appropriating the full amount. So you have to raise the full amount in some way, or have it budgeted.
Or the administration would have to come back to us and say, you know what, we want to void that, because we haven't gone out to the marketplace to bond the money, and this is what happened, and explain to us what happened. Or start from scratch.
Or they, the law turns on the idea of appropriations. The town officials are limited to what funds are appropriated, and that's how you sort of control them. So that's, you've given them the power to spend all the money, and now the town is liable for it. And I'm afraid it would rebound on the Board of Finance to come up with the missing money if they spend it.
So we'd be appropriating it, so therefore they could spend it,
Yes.
but they'd have to have the money to be able to do that.
They'd say, Board of Finance, where is it? I mean, that's sort of, the problem with the law isn't really.
It's an interesting question because we've run into this in the past. Specifically, an example that I can remember is when we do school building projects, there's a reimbursement element of it. But in order to be eligible for the reimbursement, we need to appropriate the funds, and then the full funds are appropriated, and then the reimbursement comes in, and we only bond the net amount. And I think that's very similar to what happens with state grants as well, as I recall. We appropriate the funds for the grants, knowing that the grants are coming. And then that appropriation is the trigger to the state to say, you can approve that grant now, and we get reimbursed. But the
And the
appropriation
grant
is the,
automatically brings down the amount you can
of the bond.
Right.
So it's really the difference between the authorization for the appropriation versus the granting of the bond. What I don't know is, does FEMA require us to go through that same process of appropriating the full amount in order for the amounts to be eligible for FEMA reimbursement? And I think that goes to your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, first a clarification, Mr. Walsh's statement that this 1.2 million is the administration's number. That number is simply a mathematical, arithmetic calculation of 0.25 times the estimated number. If the administration, myself, or anyone else I'm aware of, is making a projection on what we actually think we're going to get, that is simply an arithmetic calculation. Secondly, I think, I do not know the answer, direct answer to the
Right.
question, but I do know that not authorizing it limits the opportunity to bid it, and you're not going to get FEMA funds without bidding. So you have an issue there.
If we appropriate it, I'm just saying reducing the amount of the bond.
So that's my third comment, is I would assume that you could make language changes to item number 2, where it says, to finance such appropriation, they shall borrow a sum not to exceed. And you can put any number you want in there, but the other point, as Mr. Cleary made, you would then have to also stipulate that the remaining funds shall be taken from the general fund. Because if you're going to authorize, there needs to be a source of funds to total the authorization.
I think, I share your concerns, Jim, for sure. I'm thinking that I'm agreeing with Mr. Mayor's position, and I think that if this board, I think the end run solution, if we wanted to reduce or restrict the amount of bonding, there is one way of doing it that I think would satisfy all parties except maybe the DPW, which is that we could prioritize the 23 items. In other words, if we want to do all 23 items, if we agree with them that we should do all 23 items, it sounds to me like we have to pass this. I'm not saying these exact numbers, but we have to pass this in some form in order to get the ball rolling, be able to, like Mr. Flynn said, have contractors take us seriously when we go out for bid and so forth. So if we really wanted if we wanted to protect the town in terms of the potential exposure, which I think is at the end of the day is what you're saying, then we could say we want to, for the time being, we want to focus on 11 of the 23 items, hypothetically, and then those totaled up might be only 3.2 million. I'm making numbers up. I mean, I'm not saying that's a solution. I'm not even recommending it, but I think that sounds to me like the only solution for reducing the bond resolution and still having the projects be brought to fruition in the fashion that I've seen them handled in the past in my 3.5 years on the board.
Right.
And I understand the school reimbursement process, and we've had a lot
Issues.
of experience and issues with it,
Right.
but a lot of experience. We know we get approximately 27% on new school construction. We know what the process is. No one knows this process fully. It's just estimates.
We don't know if Congress
We've never
will
gone
pass
through that. We don't know whether the money's even there because of every community along the East Coast that's claiming this money. And you're asking us to take a risk on approving this, getting going, because you're going to try to get these projects done as fast as you can by July 1st. We might not even know till after July 1st whether we still might not know after July 1st what the reimbursement rate might be, whether it's 75%, 30%, or 0. And by that time, the money's all spent. It's quite a risk. This is not like, at least with the school, it's 27% of the project. We're talking about 75% of the project here. We don't even have a FEMA expert at this table that we're supposed to be hiring so can even give us some guidance or answer any questions of what they've seen during, the New Orleans event or some of the other big events. We have no expertise at this table in regards to this reimbursement process. But I'm supposed to authorize $5.2 million, but wink, wink, we think it's really going to cost us 1.2, but give us full authority. And by the way, we're going pedal to the metal on spending it because we want the taxpayers to have it all done by June 30th so that we can all enjoy it again. It's just a risky proposition in my book. I mean, I understand it, and I hope it all works out, but no one knows. And it's 75% of the project. That's at risk here.
Let me take the other side of that.
Sure.
if I could. And as someone who is not the quickest to ever pull my pen out to sign checks on behalf of the town, looking through the list of items here, and I'm no expert, they look to me like almost all of them are critical or notable town facilities. It doesn't, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Jim, but the truth is, at the end of the day, unless we think that they're doing something wrong or they're, making bad decisions, I'm not saying you are, or that the cost estimates are wrong, I'm saying, unless, it doesn't strike me that whether this is bonded or not, the town of Fairfield is not going to fix Penfield Pavilion, or the town of Fairfield's not going to, I don't have the list of 23 items in front of me, but it sounds like they're all, like, you know, kind of, the kind of things that we consider to be part of our town's basic amenities and so forth, so.
Well, it goes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it goes to the point of when you're looking at these projects that we're being asked to approve, you got to factor them in that it's $5.2 million. And for purposes of the discussion, you got to factor in that whatever money we get back on these projects is graded.
Right.
Therefore, it goes to, do you believe that the projects that are included in this list are critical, right? Are to bring quote-unquote essential things up to snuff, right? And, oh, by the way, that the town would be willing, should we not get
Well, that's
full
I think that's the
reimbursement
point I'm
back,
trying to make, right.
to bump other items off the list.
Right.
So these things should be mission critical, because it's, you gotta look at it, if we don't get money back,
Right.
to the point, what other items are not getting done?
Well, that's
Because
what-
these items were prioritized ahead.
That's why I posed a question within my statement, which is
Right.
I'm making the assumption, and this is where I think the presentation will help us, I'm making the assumption that these 23 items are items that we're, short of being impoverished, that we are likely to want to do.
That's correct.
And if that's the case, I think we think, or we've been told by the administration that, given the level of interest rates and so forth, that bonding is the right solution. And also, as Jim says, wink, wink, we don't think it'll be $5 million anyway. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, and again, I'm preface this by saying that I'm not 100% sure I necessarily know if all 23 are critical, but I'm making that assumption for the purpose of my discussion, then I don't actually, at the end of the day, think it makes much of a difference, to tell you the truth, because I don't really think we're going to tell the town that Penfield Pavilion's going to sit there as a hulk of.
Right. And to your point, if your mindset, this is $5.2 million on critical items, period.
Right.
And we're willing to bump other items off the
That's correct.
list.
That's correct. So in other words, I think
Right.
what we should do, if I may, what we should do is allow the presentation to go forward on the 23 items.
Yep.
And hopefully not each one as long, because we'll be here literally as long as the last meeting. But if we could just get a quick sense of the necessity of those 23 items. I don't know if the 23 from 1 to 23 are in some sort of priority order, for example. But I think at the end of that discussion, then I think we can circle back to this more global
I think this
discussion.
was very good because it laid it out and it lays out the global case. Did you
Right.
have something that you wanted to say, and then I want to go to Mr. Brown?
No, I hear these arguments, and to some extent, some of them have to be, you have to be
Right.
done. But until I'm told otherwise, if I decide to go along with this, I'm considering this $5.3 million as bond out the door. Now 1.2 or
Yeah.
whatever, it's going to have to be put into the administration's numbers as more bond on, out the door. It's going to influence my decisions going down the way on other projects. For example, what's going to happen with, Riverfield? I mean, we have a school that's operational or whatever. We just had this storm and it's a $5.3 million hit. Well, we might be getting money back. We might not be getting money back. Well, and that's going to influence my decisions on a project like that or other projects that the administration might be bringing forward, because up until that point in time, that we get checks in that total 75%, it's money out the door.
Yep.
And it's more bonding that's going against.
Yeah, we have to look at it as a
our 10%
$5.2 million.
threshold and all that other stuff.
And I would agree with that, and that's why I would say that, I know Mr. Bruto's been waiting, but I would say that's a great reason, though, to hear the report on the 23 items. Because then I think we can circle back to Jim and others and say, hey, wait a minute, now that you've said this, I can think of 3 of these things that are just not mission critical, hypothetically, and then we could reduce the amount of bonding, hypothetically.
Mr. Polito,
Thank you.
on this topic.
Mr. Mayor, kind of in the realm of what we're talking about here, in the recent past when we've had bonding resolutions, we've gotten an updated waterfall chart showing where the project that we're being asked to vote on fits in to the overall scheme if it's approved as it's presented. Do we have an updated waterfall contemplating this project?
Well, actually, the town has never had a waterfall project by project, and we'll be receiving one at the meeting on February 7th.
So the answer is no, we don't have an updated one.
We don't have one today. these will, these projects will be incorporated in the waterfall that will be shared for the February 7th meeting.
At what level will they be included in the waterfall in terms of what dollar amount?
Waterfall addresses the requirements on a net basis.
Sorry?
On a net basis.
Oh, so it is the administration's estimate of 1.2 then?
I haven't done it yet.
Okay, so, but your estimate is 1.2? I mean, you're saying net?
I don't think it'll come in at 1.2. I think that there will be a higher number, but I haven't fully formed that number yet. And, you know, we will be engaging the FEMA project. We'll be voting, I think, tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Tomorrow at 3 or Thursday at 3 to select the FEMA consultant. We'll have more information. But that number is, this is an estimated number. I mean, it's, the board needs to make a decision whether you want to put everything on hold until we know everything, put everything on hold until we know more, or make a decision so the town can go ahead.
But on any future waterfall, until we know the reimbursement and how definitive it is in numbers, you've got to put the $5.3 million on there. Or how can we trust this waterfall document at all if you're just guessing?
Every number in the waterfall document is an estimated number.
So I guess
If
at
the
that
work-
capital meeting
if the work,
then.
the numbers, well, let me rephrase that, that's not quite a true statement.
Sure.
Our current
That's
debt
what it really
service,
is.
our current outstanding debt
Mhm.
is known.
Yes.
Right.
Projects that are currently underway that have been bid are pretty much known, but they may or may not have overruns.
Okay.
Every project that has not been put out for bid, that has not been started, is an estimated number.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with the fact that it's an estimated number. We understand we're not dealing with known numbers here, but even if we take the number that's in front of us, which is 5.2 million, knowing how that fits into the overall waterfall would be helpful, because then we know, all right, going forward, this is where our debt level is, assuming that this is going through at this number, and it will impact what we decide on future projects. It's good to have the whole puzzle, and I thought that we had been getting in the habit of having that
We have.
updated waterfall when we've had bonding resolutions in front of us.
We have.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, the first selectman's told me, both at the Board of Selectmen and in private, that on every project that was going to come before us with bonding, that we'd have the waterfall
That's
project
correct.
and show how it was going to influence it. So we'd be able to make
Had
decisions.
this, I have 3 comments on that. Firstly, had the waterfall meeting, had work been prepared and completed by September, before I took this position, when the waterfall project was originally scheduled to be presented, then you would have had a waterfall project.
But that's the capital plan
And
workshop.
that's what the waterfall project, that's when it's presented.
But no,
As far as I
no,
know.
No, no, no.
We're talking about two
no.
different things. They're related, but two different things.
Secondly, there is not, that I have seen anywhere, a waterfall project that is project-specific. It's only dollar-specific.
Right.
We're going to borrow this much money. It's not tied to a list of projects by dollar amounts.
Understood.
So it's incomplete from that perspective and really wouldn't serve your purpose.
It wasn't, in the past.
Thirdly, if I may say,
Sure.
we're talking about borrowing money at approximately, I'm going by memory here, about $10 to $12 million a year. The impact of $1 or $2 million, plus or minus, on this project, or this list of projects, is not going to have a significant impact on the waterfall debt service schedule.
Okay, on the waterfall project, let's take that number one. Number one, the capital planning workshop has been delayed several times at the request of the administration for a variety of different reasons. First one being the changeover in the CFO role, the second one being the hurricane and not having the impact of that. And the third one, I think there was a scheduling conflict because we wanted to have it earlier in January, and it didn't happen because of some scheduling issues with the administration. Be that as it may, that's scheduled for about, I think, what, 3-4 weeks from now?
February 7th.
Right. At that meeting, Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely correct. One of the items that is addressed at that meeting is a is a potential waterfall model that looks out to the future and goes out over 20 years and says, if we continue at this rate, here's what it is. And you're also correct in saying that one of the things that's been implemented on that by the administration, which is a good thing, is actually putting it together on a project-by-project basis. And that's all welcome news and very good. Now, the other side of that coin is that in the past couple of years, since we helped develop the waterfall model, at most, but not all, discussions regarding future appropriations and bonding or current appropriations and bonding, that waterfall schedule is saying, hey, here's what it looks like to date based on dollars, right? Not project by project based on dollars is what this is. Adding in the fact that you're going to spend $5 million tonight or whatever, right? That's also factored in, okay? And then you look and say, this is what the impact is on the waterfall model. That's what's happened. That's what's been done. That hasn't waited for a capital planning workshop. I'm not being critical, I'm stating a fact. It also is a fact we have been told, and it was our druthers, that when we did look at future bonding resolutions, we would have the waterfall model with us. I mean,
Right.
that has absolutely been told, regardless of the capital planning workshop. Be that as it may, okay, I think Mr. Brockfeld's statement is the appropriate one to move us forward, which is essentially we need to consider these as 23 projects that in total cost $5.2 million. The administration needs to say that these are critical projects that restore what was done in the past, what was there in the past, and that they're your priority. Knowing full well that if they do come in at that amount, other items are going to be lower on the priority list and may not happen or may not happen in the time frame that they think it's relevant for or would like. That's the way that's the way I'm going to view it. I think that's the way we have to view it.
Agreed.
Mr. Stone, you had a comment. I just
Well,
wanted.
you said actually what I was going to say. These things are, they're asking for are things to be repaired or replaced that were damaged by that storm. And I just want to hear the presentation of priorities and get moving on it. Because,
I agree.
Because it's a waterfront community, and the whole waterfront is a priority to me.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Mr. Brown.
Question much more specific and probably easier to answer. Just want to be clear, the insurance in this particular project, the insurance company covers everything over $500,000?
No, the only thing we expect to have any type of coverage on is the Penfield Pavilion.
Right, that's what I'm talking about, the pavilion. So they'll
Correct.
cover everything over $500,000 with the Penfield Pavilion.
That's the way we believe it's going to play out, and our risk manager, Eileen Kennelly, has been, she's the best person to answer it, but the indications are, yes, it will be covered over $500,000.
Mr. Lombardo.
Yeah, our risk management, Eileen sent us an email this afternoon saying that she's been dealing with the insurance company, anything over $500,000 at Penfield will be covered, including enhancements, code-related, okay, up to $3 million of enhancements. We don't anticipate enhancements. So she did get that information for us, and she's going to be making later on.
So it's a $500,000 deductible.
Correct.
And then anything above $500,000, including enhancements that are code-related, will be covered.
That's not what it says.
Okay.
I mean, maybe I'm just reading this wrong, but it says insurance. The uncovered out-of-pocket cost of the town may be eligible for a 75% reimbursement of this cost. So the way I'm reading this, you have to pay up to $500,000. After that, you're basically talking about a 75-25 split, dollar per dollar. I mean, am I reading that wrong?
Yeah.
Right, explain, please.
The first 500,000 is the portion that's FEMA reimbursable. After 500,000 is covered by insurance.
Okay, so this is talking about
100%.
both FEMA and the private insurance carriage. All right, that's what I missed.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Just a quick follow-up thing. So
Please.
the insurance company has no claims to any FEMA money? Is that what we're saying? That FEMA money
FEMA
is ours?
considers insurance. Insurance is primary, FEMA is secondary.
Okay.
Thank you.
to use health insurance.
Why don't we go on, Mr.
Talk
Walsh?
about
yes,
this project still?
Yes, we're talking about Penfield.
Penfield, in order to talk about Penfield, we are now going to be raising the building, correct?
Most likely correct.
Out of the $1 million, what percentage of the money is to do everything to do with the raising of the building? Changing the piers, make them higher, right? They're all going to be made higher? All the supports, all the foundation work is going to be made higher?
Correct. So
What percentage of the project? I guess my question is, are we going to get the full 500,000? Because if the building stayed at its exact height, could the building be repaired for 500,000 or less? Because then we wouldn't get, the insurance company's not going to pay for the building to be raised, is it?
yes, they will.
Just said
Yeah, so,
He just said it
They
will.
will.
Yeah. So in order for us to build, a building after May of 2013, it has to be above the flood elevation at that time. So whatever that V zone is that's there, so the bottom of our structural members has to be above that so that the flood waters could be, not impact that.
Okay.
So yes, that,
Why don't you start at the beginning and tell us what you're trying to do with Penfield, why you're trying to do it, and what the enhancements are. My apologies, let us listen to your presentation
Sure.
on it, and then we'll go from there.
So basically, the structure of Penfield Pavilion that's there now with the meeting room, the cabana lockers, the kitchen, the deck area, all the usable square footage will basically stay the same. Instead of the current, basically it'll be all new pile-type footing. So the
Okay.
building most likely will have new structural members underneath it, something like I-beams. So those I-beams will be under there. They'll be jacked to a proper elevation above the V-zone. Underneath those new I-beams will be some sort of pier-type foundation that will go through the ground to a proper depth that a structural engineer will design. And our bulkhead, which is around it, which currently has about 7 openings so people could access the beach. Well, those will be permanently secured off, and our new touchdown system to the beach will go over the bulkhead and down into the sand. In the interior of the building, there is most likely, with the shear that's occurred, most likely some electrical rewiring that has to be done, some cosmetic type sheetrock work, painting type work, but that's what we expect the nature of that type repair to be of Penfield.
Mr. Polito?
So basically what you're saying is we're not taking down what's there and starting from scratch. We're taking the existing building and jacking it up a few feet.
Correct.
Replacing the structure underneath, obviously repairing what's been damaged by the storm inside, but you're essentially keeping the same building but just jacking it up several feet and then having different access points, because obviously with the building being higher, you need different stairs, different handicapped accessibility, things like that.
Correct.
All right.
Like Penfield too, then?
Correct. Right.
Other questions on this? Mr. Walsh?
I guess the overall question I have is, how did that happen? I mean, we have a brand-new building. I presume we had engineers and specialists who build beach places and things like that.
Yeah.
And we have the place open for several weeks last year, and we get hit, and the place is trashed. Didn't withstand that first storm. Now, we have this second storm, and we have $1 million damage to approximately $5 million building. What didn't the engineers and architects do at the time that they should have done?
Well, that'll be the charge to one of our consultants to determine, and once again, not only is a structural engineer, a geotechnical engineer, a foundation type engineer, but also a coastal type engineer to analyze what happened during this storm, and obviously a couple reasons. What happened to the storm, in case there is any possible errors and omissions against the designer of the previous one.
Yeah.
But second to that, so we don't go down the same road twice. So we have, I could discuss, anecdotally what we witnessed, what happened. But once again, that'll be, play itself out in the analysis that we commission for the design of the building.
Mr. Mayor, is the administration looking at this legally to try to recoup some of the taxpayers' monies that we're going to have to put towards this? Because it just seems kind of unfathomable that we have a brand-new, state-of-the-art building that we spent, a fair amount of taxpayer dollars on, and the thing is trashed after 2 storms.
Yes, the administration is.
So have we hired legal counsel, or are we using the town attorney to do this?
We're gathering evidence right now, as Mr. Michelangelo just stated.
Okay.
We need the information from the engineers.
Any other questions? Mr. Bolito?
In terms of the lost revenue because of this, because obviously there were events scheduled for the pavilion that were taken off the book, so to speak, is there any insurance available that will recoup some of those costs in terms of the lost revenue?
Yeah, I think we addressed that a couple of times.
I think we
including at the
did. Just
last
want to be
meeting.
sure.
Yeah, and basically, what I reported at the last meeting, as the board may remember, we talked about rental income loss.
Right.
Which is limited to $25,000. Rental income loss, it turns out, is only related to tenant-type rent.
Okay.
This is actually business interruption insurance, and,
Which we brought up.
Yeah.
yes, Mr. Walsh actually
Yeah.
was the initiator of that conversation. At this point, we are, Ms. Lombardo is working on it. We're trying to come up with a proper way to evaluate potential revenue that we will have lost and will be losing to optimize our ability to file a maximum claim.
There's been no, strange as it sounds, but you gotta prepare for the worst. Has any person who had an event scheduled sued the town because they lost a venue?
Not to my knowledge, and I think an act of God would not be.
Right. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
I have, if any of my colleagues have any other questions on this before I have one.
I guess the
I'll
one
follow
question
up.
is, did we have the ability to get flood insurance on this bill on Penfield and chose not to get it?
We have flood insurance.
Okay. We have flood insurance on the building?
That's why.
Because
This-
it says the town has
Does
no
not.
specific flood insurance for this property in the write-up.
Flood insurance is incorporated in our policy.
So no separate flood insurance for this property?
No separate fund.
So who put that in this write-up?
I prepared the write-up.
Okay. And you just didn't know we had flood insurance, or were you ever told by any of the insurance people of the town that we just don't have flood insurance?
Yeah, I'd say I'm not well-versed in insurance to say what is flood insurance and what is not flood insurance.
Okay. I'd like to request of the administration that at the next meeting that somebody from our insurance department write up what properties we have flood insurance on, based on our policy.
Yeah, as Mr. Lombardo just pointed out a moment ago, we have received confirmation from the insurance company that it is covered, over $500,000 up to $3 million, including necessary enhancements to meet code modification requirements.
So we're covered up to anything from 500,000 up to 3 million?
Correct.
I thought that was on a liability policy, not on a flood policy. Am I mistaken on that?
Property.
I thought that whole policy was on a liability policy that the town has on all of its town buildings, not on a flood insurance policy.
That's
I mean, it's my understanding that the town liability on all town buildings is we're responsible for the first 500,000 up to 3 million. What Mr. Mayor seems to be suggesting is that we had a specific flood insurance policy that.
I never said a specific flood insurance policy. I said flood insurance. You keep trying to change my words, Mr.
I'm not,
Walsh.
I
wish
asked
you
you
would-
whether-
guys.
I asked
I
you
wish
whether
you
we had flood
wouldn't do that.
insurance.
Flood insurance is incorporated in our policy.
In our
That's
overall
one,
policy.
in our overall policy. Two, Eileen has confirmed with the insurance company this is covered. 3, I don't know about the total specifics as you're now addressing, this is the only structure that has damage that exceeds our deductible. So if the $3 million is an aggregate, that may well be, but it all would apply to this one building, I guess, because it is the only building that is damaged beyond the deductible amount
In this incident.
in this incident.
I guess my revised request is for the, I guess it'd be Eileen to write up some type of summary on the insurance we have for the town, and whether flooding is covered under some type of liability policy that we have jointly for all town buildings, or whether we have a specific flood insurance policy for any of our buildings. I would like to understand our insurance for town buildings. So if somebody from, I guess it would be Eileen, since she's our risk manager, could present a write-up for our board.
Yep, we've
For
got
the
that
next
written
meeting.
down for Jim and Caitlin, and I'll follow up on it. Okay, I want to stay on Penfield for a minute. I want to ask a question. Let's watch the tone as well, because we don't need to be confrontational on this. But I get a question on Penfield, because it's something I get asked. People mention me quite a bit. And you know what management by rumor does, so I want to be very careful as the way I phrase this, so I don't have unintended consequences. So Penfield's building committee worked very well and very hard together, and it was a successful project. We happened to host a meeting there to see how well it came out, and that was actually a capital planning workshop that we had last year. In fact, Mr. Mayor, you were on the board at the time. And everybody enjoys the project. It was a big success. However, we had the first incident of the storm last year, and there was damage, rather significant damage, not like this, but rather significant damage underneath very similar to this, underneath the pavilion. Where pilings were washed away and things sagged, right? And there was a wave, and that all had to be fixed. And one of the conclusions drawn from that was to build the berm in front of the building, right, to protect it. And, you know, I happened to go on the tour with you, Mr. Lombardo, the first tour of that building after the storm, and the comments were made that if that berm hadn't been built, we might have lost the entire building, right? But what was interesting was after that first storm, you began to hear through the rumor mill that, oh, you know, the reason that happened was the pilings under the building didn't go deep enough, you know, and they were washed away and they didn't go deep enough, and that was the problem. Okay, so then we come back this year, we built the berm, right? I would suggest, based on what I saw, the height of the building, and I'm not debating the regulations and raising the building, I would suggest that the height of the building was appropriate for the level of storm, because we didn't see any damage inside the building, right? I mean, the damage that we saw inside the building was the result of the floor dropping and the torque, because the excess weight, I sound like an engineer, the excess weight on the structural elements of the building. Right, not a good one, right, not one you want designing a building. Be that as it may, my question to you guys is, were the rumors in fact true? Were the pilings at the base of that building not put down deep enough, and they didn't withstand this storm, somewhat because of that? And it goes to the point earlier, what's the legal thing? I mean, what's going on there? Because this is 2 storms, 2 piling failures. The building itself held up relatively well, right? So what happened? I mean, and by the way, I noted in your comments, which were very well done, you kept on referring to proper. The pilings need to go to a proper level in the sand. They need to be appropriately deep. Does that suggest that they weren't appropriately deep in the original construction in some areas?
The foundation that is beneath Penfield now is basically like pier-type footings, not much different than the ones that are, you know, on our decks on our homes. They're thicker, they're wider, but they're approximately at that depth. That was designed. I wasn't here for the first occurrence what happened. But during the second occurrence what happened, and this is just an overall thing, you know, the way Penfield functioned for years is that it was fairly open and the water came underneath
Sure.
and washed on the sand basically as sheet flow, just like it'll flow across our
Sure.
backyard. And the bulkhead that was put there to protect the structure,
Sure.
what happened during the occurrence of Sandy is that one area, and the one area which gave out was one of our penetrations for the, you know, for the walkways, one of the 7 that was secured, but it was, you know, secured just beforehand. So what happened during the event, most likely, is that instead of the, you know, and once again, that bulkhead was there largely to protect the flow back into
Sure.
Fair Acres, not necessarily to protect the building. It was to protect the, you know, the land in back of it. Well, once that failed, you know, instead of the water going, you know, evenly back and forth, well, all of our water was concentrated in one area, and that's where the extreme velocities wash sand out, you know, just like a river scour.
Right.
You literally had a river going this way, and then when the tide went out, you had a river going that way. So that was the,
But were the original piers that were put in and the pilings, rather, that broke away, were they built to the engineered specifications for those
okay.
pilings?
Once again, that'll be the result of our
So you don't know at this point
Yeah,
whether they
yeah.
were built to the specifications of going deep enough or whatever. And I'm not trying to get to the bottom of it.
yeah, I'm not making
Right.
I'm not making that conclusion.
Okay,
Can I follow up?
yeah.
I know what you're talking about, I know what you're talking about, but on Penfield, isn't the building, most of it was sunk or raised, but the Phase 1 is okay? The first part that they did for a couple of years ago?
Yeah, the lockers, there's no apparent damage on that
So
side.
it was the newer new
Yeah,
that got hurt,
basically, yeah.
that's what,
Well, and all the rumors were on the newer new.
right, that's what I'm saying. Now, did the bulkhead that was built possibly, from what you're saying, cause more damage than it saved?
To the building, most likely, it looks like it did, correct. It did more to the building
Right.
itself. And once again, the bulkhead wasn't there necessarily to protect the building.
Mhm.
It was
That's
there
exactly
to,
contradictory to what we heard.
Yeah.
Right? It's exactly contradictory to what we heard.
So should the bulkhead come down? I guess an engineer's gonna look at that.
correct, that'll be part of our coastal analysis.
Right.
Okay, just for the record, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it's exactly contradictory to what we heard on the tour and what we heard, as I recall, for the reason for the building of the bulkhead in the first place. Is that?
Yeah, I think what happens is, to answer something, and Joe wasn't, part of.
No, right, exactly.
But the pilings that we put in were built to the code of the time that we built it, and designed. We didn't do deep drilling pilings. It was designed, from what I understand, and I'm not going to be an expert, I don't have to tell you what I saw in it, but it was designed to the engineer's spec. One thing that we're looking to do in the course of renovating is to answer all these questions, okay? To revisit, to make sure we don't make the same mistake as Joe said, if there was a mistake, okay? To make sure that the pilings that we put in now are, like, to cut the rumors, are they deep enough?
Because you've heard the same thing I have, right?
I was there, I heard it, okay? I saw, okay? The water came in, just like I said, washed away. You saw it if you went on YouTube, you could see it there was a video of it, okay? Not so much, it came out of the building, but it made like a 6-foot or 8-foot wide trench going right out to the beach. It was a big ditch, river. So, but the building was built to the specs, you know, the pilings were built to the specs.
So you're questioning as to whether the specifications were,
Well, we weren't expecting a 100-plus year storm.
Yeah.
It was built to the 100-year storm at the time, okay? We didn't expect to get it 8 months after we built the building. You know, finish it up.
twice?
Yeah, what's that?
Well,
Whether it's 8 months later or 80 years later is no relevance.
Right, but I'm just saying, it was, that's all I'm saying, it was built for that. The FEMA code on that particular zone now is going to 14.5, I think we're at 12.
Did we know that at the time we built it?
It was discussed that we knew the code was coming down, we didn't know when. We were concerned about the height of the building in the neighborhood. That was all impacted. Price was impacted. There was a lot of things that led to the design that we all approved and felt was sufficient, according to the engineers.
I remember them saying that it was built to, and maybe I'm wrong, please tell me, but I remember asking the I'm not saying I asked it. I remember around this table a question being asked regarding the 100-year storm, and we were told that it was built to withstand the 100-year storm, and would be as solid as the other one was during, you know, the hurricane. You know what I'm saying? My understanding was that it was all taken into consideration in the design.
Yeah, I do recall conversations like that.
Yeah.
But the other reason I think that, you know, we always relate back to the old building and how that lasted. That was packed with sand underneath.
Uh-huh.
So there was no water going through after all these years.
Uh-huh.
Very much like, almost like the locker wing. We have a lot of sand under that area. And with the new building, there was, as you saw underneath, there's not a lot of sand.
Well, maybe we should pack it with sand, Joe. How does that sound?
That might be another area that they're going to be looking at. Because it made almost like a berm itself with all that sand under there over the years. So we really don't know. I mean, we asked the same questions a year ago when we breached the wall with the lifeguard chair.
Right.
Okay, and that's where the water found its way in.
Right.
So, you know, we're not trying to, we're all in the same boat as you, as asking these questions.
Right.
And hopefully we're going to find out the answers with the design. That's as much as I can tell you from our end.
Does anybody have any follow-up questions on this right now? I'd like to know the answer to that when we find out. Just, I think it's important because there's so many discussion points around town on this. And I think it's important for us to get to the bottom of it and understand, you know, did we follow the specifications? If we followed the specifications, were those specifications to the 100-year storm like we were told when we approved the resolution, as I recall being told? And if not, why not? And if yes, you know, what happened? I think it's just important for us to follow up on it. There's too much talk about it without knowing the facts. So, does anybody have any other questions on that?
No.
Thank you. Let's go to the next one, because we only have 22 more to do. Okay.
Next item on this, our town beaches, basically replenishment of sand along the beaches. They've lost quite a bit of elevation, sand has washed away. So we've taken survey shots along those, estimated the quantities that we've lost. And one of the things that we hope to do to offset some of these costs of purchasing sand and trucking it in there is, in coordination with some of our other projects, our dredging projects of South Benson, Southport, and the Pine Creek, is utilize some of that sand on our beaches. And we believe some of the sand is of good quality, especially South Benson. But if it's not, we could always, you know, use it basically like you strip away the good sand, put the bonier stuff underneath, and do it there. So it's hard to tell what comes out of the, if we'll have that balance of stuff comes out of the, enough that we take out of the navigational channels, but hopefully we can defray some of those costs and that number will come down. But the thing is, not only so if you walk on the beaches now, they're steeper, which makes them less usable, but also what that does, it's more susceptible to erosion. So the condition will get worse quicker, and that's one that we'd like to do not only for the, for the summer season, but the quicker we do that, the easier it is to get it. There's sort of a grace period with Connecticut Deep. So that's one of those that we'd like to get done sooner, not only because of the beach season, but also because of any permitting concerns.
So the $700,000 estimate assumes all the sand is purchased?
Now that's assuming we get some, that's a combination that we do get some usable sand from our channel dredging, plus supplementing it with purchase.
So what would you guess is the worst-case scenario if for whatever reason you're not able to reuse any of the sand? So what does the $700,000 turn into if you have to buy it all?
Well, if the only way we'd have to buy it all is if we're not allowed to dredge the channels. We are going to get material out of the channels, so
Let me ask it differently.
Yeah.
How much do you think you're saving by using reusable sand?
Potentially, we could save several $100,000, I'd say.
So,
How much is
therefore,
this?
so this could be $1 million item in the worst-case scenario.
Yeah, correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I want.
What I wanted to ask is, how much are you assuming you're dredging and getting to, in other words, the 700,000 assumes how much that you use from the dredge, and how much can you actually use from the dredge?
Well, all the material we dredge, we won't send it anywhere else.
Right.
We'll put it on our beach. And,
No, I get it.
I haven't done the calculation. Somewhere around 300,000.
Somewhere around 300,000. I'm trying to process that, somewhere around. So the 700,000 assumes you're going to get $300,000 worth of sand out of your dredging projects?
And once again, that's just,
Yeah.
I'd say yes.
So to your point, it assumes we need $1 million worth of sand,
Correct.
and 300 comes from dredging and 700 comes from this.
Conceptually, yeah.
Questions, comments? Mr. Walsh?
Have you have pretty good confidence that we have 20,000 cubic yards between both the harbors?
Correct.
You've done measurements and stuff like that?
Correct. We've done, yeah.
Okay. Is there a lot more than 20,000? So during the dredging process, if we pull up 100,000 cubic yards, do we get to sell 80,000 cubic yards to other communities that need it?
Once again, that figure is based on, where we think the elevation is now. And, if we have our cross sections of our navigational channels that look something like that,
Sure.
we can't go deeper than that. So,
Okay.
we'll have our limit, and the one I'm most familiar with is South Benson. So, South Benson, if we have 100 feet on the bottom, and we come up at a slope and we're about 7 feet down, we just physically can't generate more material than that.
And this is just for the beaches, right?
Correct.
What about the rest of our coastline that goes, say, past Penfield and goes down to Fairfield Beach Road? Because I was at a client's house the other day that I'd been to before, and high tide's coming up 25 feet closer to her house, which is really now 20 feet. The normal high tide is now 20 feet from her back door, because they estimate they lost more than 3 inches. Is the town going to do anything about that? Because to me, that means that any future storm, the water is going to come over the top and flood our roads and bring more sand onto our roads, and then we're going to be redoing Fairfield Beach Road, which you want money for now, and we could get another storm. It doesn't even have to be as bad now, because we've lost a lot of sand all the way down. Is there going to be some type of program to replenish that stuff? I'm not talking about people like giving them nice white fluffy sand and stuff like that. I'm talking about up to the high water mark or something else like that, so that we don't continually have flooding on a project you're asking for money for tonight.
Correct.
Mr. Walsh, just as a follow-up, is that the town's land as, I guess, another operative?
Well, I guess,
Or is that privately
Yeah, I
owned?
mean,
Yeah.
that's a very good question. I think up to I don't even know whether it is either.
Right.
But it's definitely going to impact on future storms, money that they're asking for tonight.
Absolutely, it's a fair point.
So we could be doing it and then doing it again next year because now we're more exposed.
Right.
Currently, it's a very valid question, very valid point. Currently, that is not something that is proposed at this time. That may be something that may be, that may be sought in a future program. And the way I see it, something like that would probably be a competitive type program, more like I don't know if it's the right phrase, but a hazard mitigation program that we compete with competitively with Stamford or Guilford or other towns in the future.
Compete over what?
Compete over federal FEMA funds
Oh,
outside of
okay.
this program. Like, Bob mentioned some of the different pockets of monies out there, the 406s, the 404, different programs. That wouldn't be part of it. That's not what we're asking for tonight.
Okay.
All this money here is, and if I could use the term, it's almost like entitled money. We're entitled to get this money, or we think we are, 75% of it as part of our program. Something that you mentioned that's a very worthwhile project for both private property owners and the town would be a hazard mitigation type thing, the way I see it now.
And we're not entitled to that under any of these programs.
Not under this pocket, correct?
But you understand how it's going to be kind of frustrating that if we spend this money and then we get a much lesser storm and this money and the water comes back onto Fairfield Beach Road when we've just paved a road. That's one of the projects coming up. We're all going to be looking really bad next year, saying that we repaved a road despite the fact that we know that there's some hazard out there that now we're even more exposed than before.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you, that exact situation exists.
That's the danger of living at the beach.
Well, it's not, well, there's
There's
a
our-
danger of
there's
living
our-
at the
our
beach if
financial
you are a
danger.
private
No,
property owner,
no, I
but
know,
if we're
I know.
providing services
One at
down
a time,
there.
guys, one at a time. All right, anything further, Mr. Walsh?
No.
Okay. Any further questions on this item from board members?
Well, one question on
Yes,
this.
please.
Your reliability on cost estimate is one of the higher ones you have on here, is an 8. Why do you have such confidence in this number and this cost estimate versus some of the other? I mean, some of the other, we've only handled one other one, and you've explained that one. But why is this an 8 in cost reliability factor?
And I'd say the only reason is just because it's, there's more of a price per cubic yard of, price per ton of sand that we can identify.
Okay.
We sort of have a grand scheme of the amount of sand and the cost of sand. Whereas Penfield, we don't know if we're going to have, 20 beams that are going to be this big, or we're going to have 80 beams that are going to be this big.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that item? All right, we'll go to Fairfield Beach Road drainage, road base, and asphalt.
So this is the section of Fairfield Beach Road, basically everything west of Reef Road. So Fairfield Beach Road is, you could drive it today, there's still pavement there, but one of the things that has happened to it is with all the flooding and the damage that was done there, we expect Fairfield Beach Road to deteriorate very quickly. Generally when we design a road, build a road, we figure anywhere from a 15-year to a 20-year life. Fairfield Beach Road has been compromised severely due to the storm. This is the complete cost of rebuilding it as we think we had it beforehand. We talked about priorities out of all these projects. Yeah, if there was one that we could defer on, this would be one that we would not necessarily need to do this summer, but once again, it shouldn't be a surprise in 3 years or in 4 years or 5 years when we're spending this money anyway.
Would we be spending more if we were to defer it, and then 4 or 5 years from now, it began to
Well, I wouldn't say we'd be spending more, but we'd lose out on the participation.
FEMA money.
Oh, well, of course, right, good point, thank you.
But yeah,
Good point.
yeah,
Yep, yep.
yeah,
Excellent, yeah, you're right.
So you're almost saying that we should almost do it because we can get approximately 75% reimbursement, whereas we might not be able to get it 3 years down the line?
We definitely won't get it 2
Okay.
years down the line, and we have a fairly good certainty that it's gonna fall apart on us.
And then, when was the last time that was paved? I don't know, Mr. Bartlett, I know you're more the road expert.
I don't know off the top.
Okay,
But it was in pretty good condition,
okay.
pre-Sandy.
That's a good point.
What else? Quickly on this for myself, and so that you're aware, because you weren't with us, Joe, we actually, the board took a tour of the beach area, so we're very familiar. It was, I think, a week and a half after or so that we took a tour as a board, and some of us had gone down previously as well. So we saw the devastation firsthand, and specifically, I recall the damage to this road. With that etched into my mind, my question would be very similar to, you're looking at improvements in other areas that can actually benefit it. Is there anything differently we learned here that we should do? Scotty, feel free to come up. Is there, what are we doing here? Are we doing the right thing here by this road so that it doesn't get washed out potentially again, or that we've saved it,
There is, the drainage you see that's added in that line item is basically the middle section. So we call it between the humps. So between the humps, there is a middle section that we would add drainage to get the water out of there. That's the lowest section, the middle section. So we would add drainage to get the water out of it, and it would go back to the Pine Creek side. So there is some drainage we would add there, but short of, like Mr. Waltz said, short of the water coming over the private properties, right now there's nothing to stop that water from going onto Fairfield Beach Road. Some drainage improvements will help it get out quicker.
So what did the damage to it during the storm? What damaged the road so severely?
Well, you had...
Was it storm surge, or was it
Yeah, well, the amount of water, and basically, the surge of the water coming across and basically pushing everything across.
Yeah. And okay, so help me understand this. So the amount of water coming across
Yeah.
damaged it.
And there's, and it's almost like if there's a, when there's a water main break under a road,
Yeah.
and you have a quicksand condition on the road, shortly after that, even if you don't see terrible surface damage, you know that the base has been compromised, and you could expect more failures down the road coming.
So does this proposal use the best available methods to help us in the event that something like that happens again? In other words, have we improved it, or are we just putting back the same old, and if we get whacked again, it's going to knock it out again? That's what I'm trying to get.
Most of it, yes, will be, unless we protect do something to protect, along the coast, most likely it won't be terribly different the next time,
Won't be terribly different, meaning it'll get trashed again.
most likely, correct.
Is there things that we could do? I mean, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, so, and expecting a different result. Is there something we should be doing differently here?
If we have some sort of protection along the beach side of the private properties to keep the surge on the other side of the road, but in that whole section there, that's another issue which will play itself out. But one of the reasons why people move to the beach is to see the beach and experience the beach.
So you're saying the only way you could protect this from happening again is if you went on to other people's property and put some type of seawall that stopped it from hitting the wall? So that short of encroaching on other people's property
Correct.
and putting up some type of barrier there,
Yep.
we can't protect the road any more than this solution protects it.
Correct.
The other solution was talking about increasing sand if there was a program. You know, he said we might be competing in some future that's not
Sure,
worked out.
right.
So if we could raise the thing, I mean, the example I gave was I was at a client's house that I've seen it at high tide. Now high tide's 25 feet closer to her house, which is 20 feet off her back door.
Right.
So those houses are more exposed now to the water on a much smaller storm coming over the top
Right.
if nothing is done over time.
And it's a very good point, and the issue that I brought up is who actually owns that land, because you look at the legal descriptions for some of the properties down by the beach, you know, they'll have one of the boundaries as the water line of Long Island Sound. So does the town have any authority to put any remediation or any preventative measures there, because you're talking about private property as opposed to by Penfield where that is very clearly town property. So that's another issue, makes it just more complicated.
Okay.
Was the road compromised by the amount of water that was just sitting there for the length of time, getting like underneath the base of the, you know, sinking into the ground and getting underneath the base because it wasn't draining out?
In the middle part.
The middle part of the mountain, yeah. Okay.
Any other questions on this item? Are you exploring, and forgive me, I had to step out for a minute, are you guys exploring the type of program that Mr. Walsh and Mr. Polito were talking about regarding sand?
Correct, and once again,
Okay.
that's, you know,
Out of this
post.
That's fine.
That's post this. and-
That's all I needed to know. No, I don't want to hold this up.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. South Benson Navigational Channel reestablishment.
What happened during the storm, quite a bit of the sand got pushed into the channel there. So as I did my bad cross-section here, our 100-foot width on the bottom has been narrowed, and our depth, which was approximately 6 or 7 feet, has lost too. So what's going to happen, we have, I don't know, 600 or 700 boats in our marina there. One of the issues, getting 2 boats to pass there now will be extremely difficult, especially with the currents coming in and out of Ash Creek. And not only will have 2 boats passing be difficult because of the loss of depth. Right now, you're, during extreme low tides, some boats have to be careful for an hour around extreme low tide. And, if we don't reestablish this, our bad period won't be just for an hour during extreme low tide. It'll be 3 hours during normal tides, and instead of the biggest boat having problems, instead of the 10 biggest boats out of 600 having problems, there'll be 100 boats out of 600 having problems. So that's the issue that we face with the navigational channel. They start, boating season starts down there April 15th for the marina. The ramp is open all winter, and quite frequently you get people going out before that. So we'd like to address this soon, and once again, this sand is good sand. So all of this sand will be easily put on the beach at Jennings there, short haul. It'll be clean and easy.
Okay.
Is there a question on that, Tom?
Sure, please.
So this is strictly for the recreational, but there's no commercial traffic that goes here, or any shipping? I mean,
Please
No.
Police boats.
Police boats? So, the only question I have, and it's off topic but not completely, is, it really is, but I'll say anyway. 700 boats, I mean, everybody I know in town who has a boat brags to me and laughs about how ridiculously cheap the rental is to leave their boat there. I know people actually literally who haven't had a boat there, like they buy a dinghy, I'm not kidding, like a rowboat or something, and stick it there, just so they don't lose their spot. Is it completely impossible that this could be like some sort of assessment on the people who have, the 700 people who have boats there? I'm just wondering legally, I mean,
Good question.
I mean, it just doesn't, I mean, it strikes me as, I mean, again, I'm off field, because I mean, I don't want to bring up the rent, that's not the venue here, but this is strictly benefiting 700 people who have boats there, it's not.
And quite a bit of, they're all town residents, and
Right.
there's many more that use the ramp in excess of that.
Right.
Many
But
more
yeah,
townspeople, right?
Correct, yeah. Yeah, there's in excess of that, but
You can have visitors.
yeah, that's paid, but the people that Jerry and myself and Mike Tetro speak to don't share those opinions that it's underpriced.
Well, I'm sure.
You don't hear that, Joe? You're not hearing that, Joe?
Nicely said.
I'm sure nobody who has a boat there would say that to the people who set the prices.
And that opinion is backed up by a market study
Yeah,
that shows
exactly.
that...
Well, it's not that funny, actually.
I know it's not.
Again, like I said, I mean, I've heard that enough. I mean, it just popped into my mind because I've heard that enough that I was just wondering if there's any way that it could be structured as an assessment on the people who have their boats there. Do we have any flexibility on the rates that would do that rather than the town having to cough up $400,000?
Hopefully only 100.
Well, that's true. It's a good point. You know, that does change the funny thing is, every thought you have, all of a sudden, so wait a minute, but maybe we won't get our 75%.
The rates are set, are analyzed annually by the Park and Recreation Commission. So
We can
that's
always
the-
raise.
Mr. Lombardi, want to speak to that?
Well, as Joe said, we do a market rate of municipal and a couple of private boating facilities. Our rates are,
You're not allowed to talk anymore about...
That will speed along.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I'm just speaking off what I recall. But we did do a increase in the rates, I believe, 2 years ago, through a study. Can the rates be raised? Yes, if the commission deems so, or if this board, wishes.
Is there a waiting list for
That's my question.
boat slots?
Yes,
I believe there is.
there is.
A long
It's
one?
years.
Yes.
Depending on the size,
Years.
yeah. I've been on
5 to
7 years.
7,
5, 7 years?
depending on the size.
I don't
of the
have
boat.
that. Robin Gilmore, our manager, would have that information.
Okay, supply and demand.
Yeah. I mean, it is a separate topic. It sounds like a
related.
different problem,
I
but
think
Relevant.
you hit it right on the head. It's a separate topic, and I think we can discuss it further another time.
Yes, we will.
Perhaps March.
Yeah.
For next year.
All right. Any other questions on that?
I have one
Yeah, Mr.
question, and I'm just going to ask it, I know it doesn't all pertain to this, it pertains to the next ones, but so I don't have to ask it again on the next one. Did either South Benson or the Southport Harbor navigational channels need to be dredged already? So that this is now a great opportunity to do that project? Like, were we already planning on either one of them being dredged? Because we were starting to have problems anyway.
Channels do
Fill up over time.
naturally fill in over time. And as far as South Benson, I don't know if we had it on the waterfall schedule or if we didn't in our 5-year schedule.
Yeah.
But yeah, and once again, without having it in front of you, at some point, it would have had to be done, whether it's 4 years or 8 years or 10 years. But yeah, and South Benson has South Benson, we're clearing the channel basically between Bridgeport and Fairfield, which is a several 100-foot span. The channel goes literally all the way out into the the sound, like a quarter mile out there. So it's a long channel. So yeah, you may very well see a request in several years for that coming up.
Is any of the work going to be done on Bridgeport's property? Should Bridgeport be asking for some of this money to do the same channel? Because some of that goes off to the Ash Creek, right? There's a dividing, when you come into the harbor, you can go left or right. Left into our boat area, marina, and then the right goes to the Ash Creek. So is Bridgeport responsible for any of this?
As far as I know, I don't think Bridgeport has any municipal facilities up there. I think there are some private homes that have small docks along the west or the east side of the creek there. But no, we have not. We have not asked Bridgeport. And as far as that, the whole South Benson navigational channel is entirely man-made, and it was entirely a Fairfield project going back 40 years from day one.
Okay. That's it.
Okay. Let's go on to Southport Harbor Navigational Channel Reestablishment Similar thing here?
Correct, and once again, the Harbor Commission has been involved in this. Jeff Stedman is the person that's leading the design work, the permitting on that. But basically, the same type of thing where you have to reclaim your depth and width for the boaters involved.
Didn't they have something on this in Southport previously? I seem to recall a dredging project. Do you remember that?
Well, that's the project they've been working on, and I think that's why the Harbor Commission is working with DPW.
Right, they've been trying to do this for years, right?
Correct.
And but didn't they
They did
use
it
some
once.
money?
They did it once, and it's all come back.
They did it once and it all came back?
Right.
Okay, but was it on the books to do again? And had there been money
Well,
set
they didn't
aside
do
to
the
do
whole
again?
area.
These sections.
They did it in sections,
Yeah.
in phases, as the permits were allowed. This last go-around, as I recall, there was a lot of permitting that needed
Yeah.
to be.
Are we going to have that same problem again?
I believe that's what they're working on.
But as I recall, that took years.
Yeah, one thing that, that there is, and I wouldn't call it a grace period, but, there is a finite amount of time that DEP is giving some flexibility to a lot of these marine-type projects.
Okay. Questions, comments on this item?
And this would, both of these projects, this one and the last one are emergency type projects, right? Because of the danger with the boaters coming in and out?
Correct.
Let's go to the next item, which is the South Benson Fishing Pier repair.
South Benson Fishing Pier is a rock jetty which protrudes out into the water. If I could use my same diagram, it's currently the last several years we built it up with a sidewalk railing out there that extends out into the sound, used by sightseers, fishermen. Quite a bit of it has washed away. So right now, if you went there, you'd have to basically hop on rocks, as opposed to ideally a elderly or handicapped person could enjoy it as anybody else. So the basic sidewalk has washed away. So once again, we don't want to put the sidewalk back at the same jetty. So we want to build up the jetty higher, make it wider, protect it there, and then put our improvements on the top so it could be reutilized by everybody. And once again, that's that park gets quite a bit of use, not just for boaters, but from all our citizens.
Questions on this? Before we go, so this jetty, there's a lot of talking in your comments, it's a lot of recreational use. Does it have a function other than recreational?
It does protect the area of Jennings to the west of it from the surges. So that anytime you build a jetty there, it will protect the water. That's why people build them, not just along the rivers, but even in the middle of Fairfield Beach. That's what they're there for.
So there's an element of protection for those neighborhoods that come from having that jetty there as opposed to just recreational?
Correct. It protects the sand at Jennings Beach itself.
Particularly during this storm,
Yeah.
and the force of the water coming in, move those boulders that are on the side, push those right up. But if that jetty wasn't there, we would have had a lot more water further down than we had in the present. Where it stopped, it would have gone farther because it just would have washed all that away.
So there's an element of protection of property in this,
Oh,
not
yeah.
just recreation. Okay. Any other questions? All right, let's go to the next one.
Southport Beach is protected by both a seawall on the west side of the buildings there. There's a seawall not much different than a stone retaining wall on one side. On the east side, it's if you've seen them, it's sort of like a lumped asphalt type structure. And both of those provide the function of giving beach, of having usable beach on the south side, on the sound side, and protecting our road to the north side. So both of those have been compromised during the storm. So in order for them to do the function, both protect Pequot Avenue on one side and give a usable beach on the south side, both of those need to be reconstructed. And when I say reconstructed, the breaker is like probably no other system in the world. I don't think it was engineered. It was probably something that was handmade by my predecessor's predecessor. So we obviously would not do anything exactly like that before, but the same type intention where you protect the road and give yourself some beach.
Questions, comments on this item?
There's no reliability on cost on this because you just have not had the design, so
Thank you.
you're just basing it on the linear foot of what you need to do.
Correct, yeah.
And based on that, you can't give a
Well-
1 to 10 scale.
Well, I think I just omitted it, but if I had to pick a number now, I would say it's probably around a 6 or 7.
Good. Next item is the creek.
Okay. The Pine Creek, as you know, as you can imagine, a lot of the damaged houses that were damaged by the waves and got pushed back into the creek. There was quite a bit of debris along there. We fished out the larger pieces with our construction equipment, did some handwork along the side, but we haven't actually got a vessel in there which you would need to literally pick up the debris that's in and around the sand. It's both on the surface. You can see bits and pieces are protruding out. So that's something that we have to do as part of it. And the navigational channel, again, which was fairly shallow, has now had quite a bit of sand washed into it. And once again, with the flow of Pine Creek, the sand got forced in all at once. So we don't think that because there's not much velocity, we don't think the velocity of the creek will wash out that sand, any way naturally to give the residents there and everybody else that uses the creek the ability to use their docks if we don't reestablish this channel.
Do we have a requirement to get that debris out of there anyway? Are there environmental requirements and things of that sort?
Yeah, I don't know if there's formally, but yeah, I would think we have an obligation one way or the other to do it. Just, I don't know if it's morally or anything else, but yeah, we.
There are questions on this?
The only question I have is, did more sand go into that marshland too? Did it get pushed all the way into that area too?
I don't know that for a fact,
Okay.
but it is, the creek is protected.
Okay.
And the marsh is a good mile plus there.
Okay.
So I wouldn't think it would be tremendous amount of sand back
Okay.
into the marsh. The Pine Creek is protected by a formal dike, which was probably constructed about 30 years ago. So it's the only long type dike of that type we have in town, and that protected the area of Pine Creek, South Pine Creek, Dunhill, Old Dam. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. Scott and I were there at 10:30 at night, and the water was basically flush to the dike hitting our feet. So the dike did what it was supposed to do. That's why all those houses there had minimal damage as opposed to Fair Acres. But it did do some washout, some damage along the face of that rock revetment there, which is several thousand feet long. So we do have to repair the spots that it did erode in those areas there. And I put an elevation increase in there too, because even though the dike functioned for Storm Sandy, it came close to not functioning. during Storm Sandy. So the dike does have like a flat area on the top, so if you could picture, probably, I don't know, 15 feet. So if we could elevate that and crown it and build it up another 1.5 feet, it'll go a long way to ensuring that during our next Sandy where the wind blows for another hour or something, it protects against that too.
So this is replacement and improvement?
Yeah, well, not really replace, it's repairing the reinvent and, adding 1.5 feet or so of elevation.
Yep. You skipped one, I think we had it in the wrong order.
I did skip one, okay.
No, I didn't, that's okay, no problem. It was,
What was that about?
Fairfield Beach Road,
cul-de-sac.
cul-de-sac, and the seawall, and bulkhead repair. So this is the last individual one. So you want to talk about this one a little bit?
The Fairfield Beach Road at the turnaround there, that is an area where the town does own that property there. And that's our turnaround, our cul-de-sac, so to speak, the long stretch of road, nearly a mile. So that's the only turnaround for our emergency vehicles, for any oil truck, plumber, anybody that goes down there. And the thing is that, that there's,
How are they doing that now?
well, the turnaround is there, but because there's no protection on either side, on a very minimal storm, the water from the sound will go up and over right into Pine Creek. There's no protection there. There have been days where we got calls that the cul-de-sac, that the sound is flooding the cul-de-sac and washing over, and sand is there, and it wasn't even nasty weather. We were getting, just it wasn't even it's happened several times. So the water will just, several times since November. It doesn't even take a bad event for it to happen. So we need to protect the turnaround on both sides from the sound and from Pine Creek.
Anthony,
Please, Mr. Stone.
on that cul-de-sac, there's some houses, there's a big gray one, and that bulkhead is bad. Now, who's responsible for that? I assume the property owner.
Correct, yeah, we'd only be doing this stuff to
Right.
protect our...
But if the property owner doesn't fix that, doesn't that compromise what we're doing?
I don't believe it will.
You know what
Yeah,
I'm
I
talking
know
about.
exactly the property you're
Yeah.
talking about.
It's in foreclosure, I think.
Yeah, we have got to still do we've got to do the concrete wall that runs along the beach and then the bulkhead on the backside just to protect the road. And even if a private property owner doesn't fix their bulkhead, our repairs will hold our road together. We'll be okay.
Okay, that was my question.
We're just bound and determined to get Scott up here once tonight.
Sitting back there doing nothing.
I was admiring.
All right, are we good on this, Adam? You wanna-
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Mr.
On the cul-de-sac, when you look at the numbers you supplied under the detailed description of the proposal, you have a contingency of 20%. And you also have that under the Pine Creek elevation increase. And then on top of that, you have a complete project contingency of another 10%. So that means that on these two projects, you have a 30% contingency? I mean, it seems kind of high when the rest of the projects only had 10. And now there's another project earlier that had a 10% contingency, which basically means that you have a 20% contingency for that other project. Can you explain to me why the contingencies are a little bit all over the place?
When I developed the project sheets, so to speak, independently.
Okay.
Just like any capital non-recurring request with that in there. When we were preparing the entire package and structuring it, basically with the first selectman and the Mr. Mayor, that is when we, for I'd say a comfort sake, that is when we decided to request these not as individual projects, to accumulate them, and also to add an additional 10% contingency to those numbers. So, correct. So if you add all these numbers together, which are not precise numbers, yeah, there was a decision made, and once again, I was included with it, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Tetro, to add 10% to that request.
Yeah,
Does that mean we can back it off?
Well, Mr. Mayor might have just asked Caitlin for this if he can, but can you guys calculate the total dollar number of contingency in this, in the whole thing?
I think it's about 470, I think, just in.
Well, there's 470 at number 25 under contingency, $476,200.
But then there's another couple
But
hundred
then there's-
thousand in this, so you're looking at, to Mr. Walsh's point, which I had circled a couple of them as well, there's a fair amount of cushion in it.
Yeah.
Contingency.
Yeah. Right, but you've got multiple you've got, it's almost like an onion, you have layers of contingency here. Your contingency has contingency.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Michelangelo's comment is totally correct. Where there were some projects with contingency, come up this out, so we could have adjusted the number and said, okay, we want to have a 10% contingency, take out the others or calculate and make it a
Particularly
7.2% contingency.
Right, particularly since
Yeah.
you can,
Yeah.
you're asking for permission to
Correct.
move them amongst all the different projects, which is, in essence, another form of contingency.
And we were thinking the same way, when you were asking your questions, exactly what Caitlin and I were discussing.
Yeah, so if we could get that, that'd be great.
To me, that seems to be $75,000 too much in contingency. There seems to be 3 projects. There seems to be the Southport Beach seawell for $30,000.
Well, and then you gotta recalculate the 10% contingency was based on the inflated number plus contingency.
Yes, if you took 75,000 out of the
You'd be at
4.762.
82.5.
What are you doing? What are you?
Yeah. And then if you now recalculate just a 10% contingency, we can come up with the number.
Right.
It's
So
about-
let's-
It's about another 1.5%.
Yeah, so let's, if we could just get
It's
that,
like about 11.5%.
right, so, and if we back it off, it's about an 82.5 savings, right? Did I do that right? I think I did.
I think Mr. Walsh is,
The total then would be 4,687,000. And then you times that times the 10% contingency, it was 468,000.
No, Mr. Walsh, take
it's multiplied by 1.1.
550 divided by, and divide that by your new number. Take 4762 minus 75.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's 4,687 times,
And then divide that
No.
into, divide the,
by 90.
By 90.
divide, 550 by that.
No, just do the,
4,687
right back.
times 0.9
Yeah.
equals 4 million.
No,
No.
it's divided by point.
No, point. Yes.
It's divided by point. 426, 4,687,000 divided by point. 5207. And what was the number that's being requested?
387.
I don't know if that's the number, actually.
It's a little low.
It's a little low. I think if we take 4,687 minus a 10%
Well, that's 'cause you're only
contingency, right?
Yeah.
You gotta take the 75 out. You gotta take the 4,687 minus 75, right?
I already took that out of this, the 75 off of that.
Okay.
To get to the 4,687.
Okay.
So then
Yes.
that 4,6,
I know.
so
Times
4,
Do 4,687 plus,
equals 4 million.
Yeah, but it's-
Oh, no, I have to add that on. Contingency, I'm sorry.
Those two numbers together.
4,687
You get 5.
plus.
But while these guys are doing,
4,687,
while these guys are doing calculations, I can let you know through the
Yeah.
benefit of the machine, the House passed the $50 billion FEMA bill. Sure.
I get a total of 5,155,700.
right, and if you take the 5,155,700
Yep.
and do the difference, is 5,2,
5255 would be a new number with 10%.
right. 5 through 28, 200. What's the difference? Is $82,500.
That's what you said.
I know.
You're the man.
That education didn't go to waste.
No.
82.5, okay. All right.
Of course, you could have stopped in the 4th grade.
Yeah. Some would argue that I did. Okay, so let's go to the laundry list of items, which is page 12 in our package, which is the 567. And briefly, do people want to scour this and go through it? There's fire training center, there's anything that should be called to our attention here?
All of it urgent?
Correct.
I have a question.
And all,
Yes,
and all
Mr.
coverable.
Mr.
The only item in doubt, which I said FEMA balked on somewhat, was the Perry Green bulkhead, which their comment was, did it got damaged in the storm, but did it get damaged because it was old and tired, or because the storm really beat it up? So that'll be, something that they, if anything on the list is gonna get thrown out, that's our first candidate to get thrown out.
Mr. Polito, you had a question?
Yes, please. On the specific item, the Penfield Pavilion parking lot repairs for $50,000. I know that when this was originally designed, that Mr. Brockfield and myself both had some questions about the system that was used with the open grid pattern with the pea stone put in, and would it cause people and women in high heels to injure themselves and whatnot. Obviously, it didn't fare too well. Would we be better off, rather than doing that type of system again, just paving the thing over? Or would it have been more destructive if it had been paved over?
No, most likely would have held up better if it was paved over.
So what's the plan going forward? Are we going to put the same system in, or are we going to pave it over?
Well, I know operationally there has been some issues with, as you said, especially with the handicap spots.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that, that this does, it does provide infiltration, so we don't need drainage there. So so we will definitely get rid of some of this area so the building functions better, especially in the handicap spots. If we do eliminate these open type systems, we'd have to invest money in underground drainage system to convey the water off somehow.
So you have with the open grid system, you have the risk that it's going to deteriorate more rapidly with another storm than the paving would, but if you went with the paving, you'd have to spend more money to put a drainage system in.
Correct.
So 6 of one, half dozen of the other, basically. All right, thank you.
The other thing I might argue too is we can add all the drainage we want down there. The area is saturated, and during any of these high tides, the drainage doesn't function. So I think the impervious pavers by their design work, other than a superstorm like Sandy coming. In a typical rain, the ground gets infiltrated, nobody floods, it does its job.
Right.
But again, if Superstorm Sandy comes by again, it's gonna blow out.
To that question before we go on, is there anything we should be doing, Scott or Joe, that we're not doing to help? I know, and by the way, I want to compliment you, and Scott, I want to compliment you specifically, but your entire team. I mean, we're talking a lot about tonight, we're questioning a lot, we're probing a lot. You guys did a great job during the storm. Police, fire, and yourselves, and all the town crews. And I know you single-handedly procured those pumps that really saved a lot of valuable property for people, whether they know it or not. So, your 30 years of experience there really held up well for us, so
Yeah, the only thing I would have to do a lot of explaining if we rented the pumps and didn't use them.
We're just ripping you a shred.
Scott, you and your replacement.
Valid point. But to answer your question, we're constantly always looking at, like, we're redesigning the 2 grass parking lots at Penfield now, and we're looking at underground detention just to help hold groundwater during these heavy, raining events. So we're always looking at how to improve down there, but, the answer is, it's a flat system. You can almost go down Penfield Road and divide it. East goes out towards Reef, west goes out towards the boat basin. But on any given heavy rain event, that system will fill up, and especially if it's a high tide, won't really circulate out of there until the tide goes out.
Okay, but here's the question I have. This wasn't a heavy rain event so
Correct.
much. It was a storm surge event.
Right.
And then the water came in. How it was described to me very basically was that the storm surge came in,
Right.
the water got trapped and didn't drain out. Therefore, you had to get the pumps in order to pump the water out. Is there anything we can be doing in order to help it drain more naturally as opposed to the pumps? Or is that just
I think that is
ridiculous given the
No,
No. Yeah, there are some things we are looking at. Once again, this is above and beyond this improvement.
So FEMA wouldn't help us with that?
And this is, once again, in like a mitigation. That's not rebuilding
Okay.
our infrastructure, that's creating new infrastructure. So, yeah, a new type system to get the water, out of
Right.
Fair Acres. There's only one door out, well, most of the stuff, as Scott goes, it says it divides, but most of the stuff exits through a 48-inch flat pipe through the fire training center. And so that's basically how it enters, and half of the time it doesn't enter. So yeah, that only lets a certain amount of water out. So to change that, and instead of having a 48-inch pipe, it's almost like a separate structure outside of the tight gate, a floodgate where you just open it and you let it out all at once. Cities like Stamford have saltwater pump stations. So when the water comes in Stamford, it gets pumped out by a 20 million gallon per day pump, that permanent one that costs $5 million. So that may be something that that in the future gets built. And once again, this is just in theory. And not only would that serve Fair Acres, we have a problem in our downtown area obviously under our railroad crossing, and where the intersection where the Snappy Gator is, whatever that is.
Sanford Street.
Yeah, now that gets on August 15th of this year, which wasn't any kind of storm, that had a foot of water there. So some sort of drainage modification in the future as a mitigation thing can not only serve Fair Acres, it could serve downtown too.
What are we doing about that? Are we looking at that now?
Correct, and that's one of the infrastructure projects that goes forward. Similar to is that a solution for this community going forward? Beyond this, similar to a permanent barrier along our 3 miles of coastline, 4 miles of coastline.
Mr. Mayor, you had something you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, this is we've talked about, I want to differentiate between, there's mitigation of current town infrastructure that has been damaged.
Right.
Okay. That can be, those are called 406 mitigation projects.
Right.
Those can be built into the restoration currently based upon the storm damage. Then there's 404 projects, which we've alluded to earlier but haven't really addressed, which are competitively bid.
Okay.
The reimbursement rate on those is more like 67%.
None of these are those?
None of these are those, but this would be like...
They're competitively sought. It's like we'd be looking for.
This is like a new project. So if you want to do something
Yeah.
like based upon this storm, we think that, it's not based on storm, based upon potential future storms, there's something that we want to do that's brand new.
And some of that is reimbursable?
That is reimbursable at 67%.
Okay, so what's our game plan and time frame to get those things, I mean,
Those have not been identified or quantified at this time, but
They're also post-event though, because what happens is FEMA, based on what it pays out to each state, comes up with 404 mitigation as a percentage of that payout to that state. And the competitive aspect we're referring to is we'll be in competition with all the other 168 municipalities for that money, and it does not have to be related to Sandy. So there's no guarantees, but that's the pot of money we would be hedging our bets on trying to get some of that money.
But there is a plan in place. What I want to know is that
We're working
basically
on that
this
plan.
is,
That plan is not totally in place.
and I don't mean this in a bad way, this is what we're voting on tonight is a reactive set of plans based on the results of the storm. What I'm asking about is a proactive set of plans based on lessons learned, what we can do better moving forward.
Yeah, it's a little of both, actually. Some money here is pro.
Agreed.
You know,
Yeah.
it is
You're
proactive
raising some
because-
things, you're
right, there you
fixing
go.
some things, I get
Yeah,
it.
FEMA guidelines allow us to get reimbursed for the damage, and then that 406 mitigation piece is up to that amount. So if we're gonna put in round numbers, $50,000 repair into a stone wall, we have up to $50,000 mitigation. If we go to $75,000, we have to pay that $25,000 on our own and get 75% of the 50,000 mitigation. So they're kind of running neck and neck. A lot of this is in response to rebuild the infrastructure, and then a percentage of it is proactive mitigation that we feel, instead of watching the seawall in Southport Beach go down again, we're saying to FEMA, and they're agreeing, let's cost out what it is now. That would be our cost to rebuild, and how much to do it differently through our sea consultant that's going to tell us how it's going to withstand the next event.
We have a sea consultant?
Well, as part of this money, we'll be bringing on consultants that specialize with this, yes. We feel it's necessary to make sure we don't.
I'm
want
not
those-
saying it's not,
Yeah.
I'm just, I want to make
The
sure we're
reason we
not
didn't break it out is
problem
those costs are in the projects themselves.
Any other questions, comments on these items?
But for the record, that's active FEMA, like I'm in touch with the guy daily. In fact, February 4th, only because he's out for a few weeks. He's coming in, and what we do is go out to these projects, we run cost on current cost, mitigation costs. Concurrently, there's an RFP going out for consultants to come in and help us develop those plans. But, you know, the reason we're really itching to get a lot of this is we feel a lot of this money is necessary to replenish the beaches for this summer's success, and some of that 404 mitigation money will be future, funding.
Okay. Mr. Walsh?
Just like to ask you kind of a global question now that we've circled back. I've not heard, Joe, one project that doesn't have to be done right away. You know, we said we were going to go through this whole list, and there's not been one project that's been listed that does not sound like it needs to be done right away.
Correct, with the only, and once again, the way Fairfield Beach Road, as I said, that could probably go several years, but once again,
We'd lose the funding of the possible 75%. So we'd be hurting ourselves by not potentially doing it.
It's hard to, I appreciate you bringing us back to that point, because
Yeah.
that's where we wanted to circle back
Yeah.
to. But after listening to the presentation, it's hard to argue against any of these in this current form, because the way I understand it, we'd be giving up our opportunity to get reimbursed. So, no, nothing they've shown us appears to be a completely unnecessary project. I'm sure they could prioritize it if they were forced to. But then, by definition, anything that wasn't presented to FEMA now would be 100% our cost. I'm guessing I'm saying the right thing, rather than potentially getting 75% back, so.
Is there a deadline to put in projects where you now possibly could lose the 75%? Like, is there other projects that you might be coming back to us under a different project list to add on?
we don't, February 12th, Scott mentioned the date, and I would say no, and once again, and it's not intentionally, we have a miscellaneous dike and tide gate improvement, so, not that that's a catch-all, but we have many tide gates around town, so that's sort of a catch-all. We don't think that there's anything else that we're going to identify to either FEMA or to this board that's not on this list.
So basically, we don't put in by February 12th, it's use it or lose it?
And the reason, those dates work because FEMA identified, because of the snowstorm, I forget, I think it was November 7th or 8th, so they ran the storm from, say, October 29th to November 8th,
Yeah.
but then they run a kickoff meeting, which was November 12th, and they give you 60 days from that kickoff, or 90 days to qualify. So February 12th, we know, is our identifying number. Then you have 18 months that triggers back to the event to get all the work done. But again, we feel most of these projects should go forward to get our beach season set up. And some of those projects, potentially could go into the 18-month timeframe.
Okay.
Yeah, Ms. Bartlett said pretty well. The only thing I'd add is, the February 12th date is the deadline date for projects. You can add no new projects after that date, but you can amend the projects and change the dollar amounts and
Based on better information. Yes. Can you, very briefly, can you tell us a little bit about the costs and what we're going for FEMA? Because you were kind enough to go get the schedule, so if you could just briefly tell us that.
Yes, and before I do that, I want to say with respect to Mr. Walsh's, well, let me back up even one more step. As I'm sure everybody here knows, this whole FEMA concept, this storm was a fairly big deal. I mean, it was a very big deal. Had not happened in Fairfield before. We're all on a learning curve here, both with FEMA and the insurance. And qualifying some of the earlier comments about the insurance, I mean, my understanding of insurance is primarily based upon conversations with our risk manager, who's constantly having conversations with the insurance broker. And we haven't come to final understanding of anything at this point. And that's why actually I think having a summary of the insurance for town buildings and how all this is folded together as a presentation to the board, I think is a good idea, because that will be the culmination, theoretically, of our understanding of that part of this. Because there's the insurance part, there's the DPW, the building part, there's the cleanup part, and so I think that recommendation suggestion was a good idea.
Mr. Mayor, one thing, I think, Mr. Bartley, you have, and forgive me, I can't remember her name, but you have a woman who works for you who's got a fair amount of experience.
Charlotte Lee.
Yeah, and my understanding is she's done a yeoman's job with a lot of the work to date, a lot of the cost accumulation. Can you thank her for us and let her know that we wanted to specifically mention her, because I understand that there's been a lot of effort on that part. So.
Yeah, I will pass that along to her. Thank you.
Yeah. And the storm impacted a significant number of departments. And in going in alphabetical order, building, conservation, engineering, the First Selectman's office, the finance department, fire department, of course, health, human resources, IT, the library, parks and recreation, police, Department of Public Works, of course, the senior center, the sewer department, and solid waste and public departments were all impacted. All had personnel who worked overtime, who they were all impacted by the storm one way or another for work. These people worked hard. They put in long hours to mitigate the impact of the storm on town services, to ensure public safety, and provide other help and support in many ways. They all responded admirably and performed well in this time of crisis, and the town owes them all a strong statement of appreciation. In response to the storm, the First Selectman formed a storm response team. The focus of this team is fourfold. One, evaluate the town's response to the storm, identify areas for improvement when and if such another disaster hits. Two, evaluate the flooding patterns to identify any actions the town can reasonably take to reduce damage from any further flooding events. That's what we were talking about, the 404s just a little while ago. Three, work with UI to help them identify improvements they can make in their response and support efforts to us. That did not go as smoothly as we would have liked. And four, to develop and implement a process to maximize the town's FEMA reimbursement opportunities. Members of the response team are DPW Director Michael Angelo, Deputy Fire Chief Art Reed, General Auditor Connie Nolfi, Mr. Bartlett, and myself. So these comments are focused tonight, are focused just on number 4, the fourth focus, maximizing the FEMA reimbursement dollars. In that regard, the town initiated the following steps. We put in place a process to capture all the funds expended in response to the storm. The town was divided into 4 expenditure subsets, fire being one, police being another, DPW being the third, and the rest of the town being the fourth. Fire, police, and DPW have had fire experience with other storms and have been collecting their costs, recording, and collecting, and scheduling their costs out on their own. Ms. Snolfi, the town's auditor, has been working with the other 10 or so departments that have been involved and incurred expenses to schedule out the costs incurred by those departments. We also considered and determined it would be beneficial to engage a FEMA reimbursement consultant. We issued an RFP, we received responses from the RFP, and I think we're meeting 3 o'clock on Thursday to have we interviewed 7 different candidates, and the candidates range from national firms like Ernst & Young, Wood O'Brien, SAIC, regional firms such as Cohn Resnick, CDR McGuire, and local firms such as Dugan Associates. And we're making a selection Thursday at 3 o'clock, like I said. The functions of the selected consultant will be to help us identify and capture all costs, help us document the costs to optimize our reimbursement potential, to work with us on appeals, if any. One of the things that we have learned, because we go through the process, is that FEMA does not just approve everything carte blanche. They do deny, there are appeals, and since when we interviewed these firms, one of the things they referenced was their appeal success rate. Work with DPW in design, engineering, and construction oversight of infrastructure repair and mitigation projects. And finally, work with us to help identify potential future damage control projects for possible 404 funding. The costs of the reimbursement consultant themselves are subject to the reimbursement by FEMA at the 75% rate. So that's the background. Here's where we are today with respect to data collection. We have identified approximately $3.8 million in potential, this is all excluding infrastructure, $3.8 million in potential FEMA reimbursement expenditures. $3,600,000 for the town and $250,000 expended by the Board of Ed. About $250,000 of the $3.6 million of the town costs are not incremental costs, but costs that we would have incurred anyway.
How much?
About $200,000.
Okay.
So basically, there's also some costs that we know that we expended. No, wrong word, don't want to say that. There's some costs that we are concerned of whether or not we're going to receive FEMA reimbursement. Given the numbers that we have, again excluding infrastructure repair and mitigation costs, I think we're looking at a cost of the town of approximately, this is a range, $750,000 to $750,000.
Of incremental costs that will not be,
No.
may not be reimbursed?
That would be the total cost after reimbursement.
Right, so it's incremental
It's
costs.
the 25% share
Right.
plus
Right.
the incremental combination of the two. Sir.
Right. Mhm.
There are uncertainties, both pluses and minuses. There are, obviously, tonight, as Ken Mr. Brackfield pointed out, at 8:15 p.m., the House passed 240 to 92, something like that, the $50.7 million FEMA reimbursement.
Billion.
Billion, thank you. Which will go to the Senate very shortly. We're passing is assured. So that's one uncertainty that has pretty much been cleared up. The other uncertainty is, have we identified, are all identified expenditures FEMA reimbursable? There's probably some in there, likely that there's some that are not. On the plus side, the consultant may or may not be able to help us identify costs that we have not done. So that's the number, about $3.8 million that we know of to date, with the net cost of the town somewhere, I think, guessing, between $750 and $1 million.
That we're going to have to absorb
Yes.
within our operating accounts
Yes, sir.
in this fiscal year, and would therefore impact the fund balance, or it impacts the fund balance one way or
One
another.
way or another, yes, sir.
Right. Questions on that? I think that was an important number that we had a question to follow up on. Thank you.
Impacts the fund balance or impacts the tax rate?
Well, it's this year, so it impacts the fund balance.
Oh, I'm sorry, this year, right.
Right. It impacts the ending fund balance for this year, and then moving forward.
But by definition, if we chose to replenish,
You
I
could,
mean, one way or another.
Exactly.
It's no free lunch, obviously, so,
Right.
right, one way or another.
okay,
We will spend it, therefore our fund balance will be less.
Right.
Exactly.
And hopefully we'll want it to be.
all right.
Would we be able to get a spreadsheet on that, on how that number's calculated?
These are preliminary numbers, and yes, there will be a spreadsheet as we get more
Go through the
definitive in
process.
our calculations.
I just have a question to Scott now that he's here, because from what I understand, you've been the FEMA expert, you and Charlotte, and done a great job in the past on some storms and things like that, so you kind of have been the resident expert. On these 406 expenses, these infrastructure expenses, has, in your experience in the past, has the FEMA been pretty good at reimbursing us around the 75% figure?
Yeah, I find FEMA to be wonderful. I know there's some skepticism, probably from this board as well as the current administration, in terms of are we getting everything we're entitled to? It's been my experience that FEMA is here to help, and they want to give us everything we're entitled to. I can give you examples. After Irene, when I took them to projects, I'm busy identifying the wall that fell over, and they're saying, well, you see that block over there? And I'm like, yeah. You put that block up when the storm was predicted? Yeah. That's costs you can recover. They were very helpful in always telling us, what did you do before the storm? Make sure we capture all that. What did you do since the storm? And they're the ones that try to say, Scott, we can pay the 50 grand to fix the wall, but let's look at mitigation, because maybe if your town's willing to spend a little, we can fix it, to better than what it was. Again, we have to spend 25% to do so, but they're trying to be helpful in the sense that if you spend that, maybe we'll build it better, and we won't be here in a couple of years. In fact, some of the damage from Irene will be currently rebuilding after Sandy. And that's why I'm really more into this mitigation than I ever have been, because clearly it didn't work, right? If Irene washed it out, and now Sandy washed out the same repair, you question how effective that was. But I know I'm long-winded, but to your point, I find FEMA to be a partner with us. I know this is taped, so I won't tell you some of the secrets, on the record. But no, there's terminology and there's different ways they work with you to enhance your refund.
Okay. And on these past projects, you weren't here earlier, and I really appreciate you coming because of your expertise in this area and your department's expertise in working with past storms. We have like a $5.2 million request before us, and based on the numbers that the administration has been putting together, that we should see potentially 75% reimbursement, and then some other insurance money on Penfield. We should be looking at the taxpayer really being responsible for about $1.2 million.
I'm not as confident on those numbers.
Okay, and why aren't you as confident, based on your experience?
Right, because again, what happens is you're dealing with, like when you were asking Joe about the South Benson Channel, that's a slam dunk. That's going to be a project that we're going to get 75%, and here's why. We have great data post-Irene, survey the channel, this is what we had. Sandy hits, survey the channel, this is what we currently have. That time frame, that documentation, FEMA says, home run, get it done, let's go to work. Not so cut and dry on Southport Harbor, because sand came in after 2005 when we previously had dredged it, and then additional sand came in post-Sandy. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that whole project is 75%. FEMA is smart enough to read the data and see that in 2005 we had a benchmark, and post-Sandy there's additional sand. I think the rough number is like 12 to 15,000 yards, but 4,500 of it is attributed to Sandy. It's my guess that FEMA's going to tell us you're getting 75% back on the 4,500 because they can prove that came in since Sandy. So that's my opinion, and I'm not going to sit here and say that that's 100%. It's just, as much as I deal with them, that's the way I see it.
Are there other projects that you're less confident on, other than the one you just mentioned?
Well, again, because of the insurances, I think we have to be cautious of the three buildings. I don't know if Joe identified the concession stands at Sasko and Southport and the restrooms at the yacht yard, But until this insurance thing is worked out as it relates to Penfield, those buildings are under a certain umbrella as well, whether the town did or didn't have proper flood insurance. And I don't know that answer. So FEMA has, written up project worksheets with me, and if the, program falls properly and the town had the proper documents, we'll get 75% back on those. If they didn't, that's not my fight, the consultant or the town attorneys. All I can tell you is I've done my job and brought it to them, but I'm not the one saying, there's no way I can say to you right now, you're getting 75% on that, based on what FEMA told me.
Okay.
But again, if it falls properly, then maybe the town has the proper insurance, and then we'll get the 75%. But I can't, you're asking me to tell you I'm guaranteeing 75% back on that. Nope.
Okay.
And Pine Creek's a volatile one because, again, there's sandy numbers in the Pine Creek that we can see what came in from Fairfield Beach Road.
Yeah.
Fresh, beige sand. That channel hasn't been maintained like a South Benson or a Southport Harbor. So, far be it for me to say that they're all gonna sit there and the FEMA folks are gonna say that that channel's 100% eligible for post-Sandy costs. There's a fair amount of debris in that channel prior to it,
Okay.
so.
All right. I appreciate your honesty.
No, it is what it is.
Because when I'm looking at it, I'm trying to figure out what is going to be the net cost to
No, I'm
the
with you.
Fairfield taxpayer. Because, it's easy to say 75%, but now I'm hearing that certain of the projects might not be. And certainly none of them are going to be over 75%, right?
No, there's no
Okay.
format.
The 75 is the top.
75 is the max.
Is the max, so then we're going down from there.
Well, it's either they participate and you get to 75 or you're out.
Yes.
And then your consultant can certainly appeal it.
Yeah.
That's
But as
again.
you properly said, they might just look and say, sand, we'll, there's 4,500 yards, we'll give you 75% off. Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
I mean, that's the numbers, the way I see it in Southport Harbor. But I also see the town having a partnership with the Harbor Commission and doing that project. I can't imagine going in and doing 4,500 yards of a potential 15,000 yard blockage, just because that's the only component, that's related to Sandy. I think we still have to restore that channel, doing the other 10,000 yards. At least that's my opinion.
Okay.
For the mobilization of doing the dredging, and it is conjoined with trying to replenish the sand on the beaches. So I think it's a value to do all 15,000 yards.
At the same time.
That's my opinion.
Okay, but then we've got to admit that some of this money might be for non-sandy things.
Well,
If we approve it.
I don't think the only one I can know of that's potentially non-sandy, again, is Southport.
Yeah.
Because of the numbers. Pine Creek's an opinion, but
Mm-hmm.
FEMA can certainly do what they want on it, but if I'm the guy with the FEMA guy and he asks me, is all this sand in there from Sandy? I'm not telling him it is, because it isn't. And that's what my relationship is with him. I go out and I identify what it is. When we rebuilt the end of the fishing pier based on my honesty, this was back after Irene, people said it was damaged before the storm, and I told FEMA it was damaged before the storm. However, it was impacted more by Irene. He climbed underneath, he ran around, he made some adjustments, but then he agreed, based on the way he saw the rocks moved out of it, it was suspended under, in midair, that it would qualify. But that's the only way to be, is honest with them. I'm not gonna misrepresent what the project is. It's what it is, and, they'll do 75% of the impact of Sandy for us.
And are these same people, the FEMA people, the same people you've worked with before?
In this case, Pete Daughtris is his name, and I've worked on him on 2 previous events.
So you guys have some level of relationship?
I've been
and,
involved with 16 FEMA to date, and I've worked with him on 3.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Mayor, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, this kind of relates back to our other conversation about the capital plan and how much money is going to be put in related to this. As I indicated, that's going to require, more work, more understanding. As we talked earlier, it would be greater than 1.2 for sure. But at this point, we're still gathering information to determine what we think is the best estimate at the time we have to, print the document.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, the item is before us. Let's pull up the bond resolution. Does everybody have a copy of it in front of them? Yes. Questions, comments, changes to the bond resolution? Let's see if anybody has anything to amend on the bond resolution. Can we, go ahead.
No, I don't, this is not a formal,
Yeah.
I don't have the numbers in front of me. We did have a slight
Yep.
adjustment based on the different
Without a
contingencies.
doubt.
And I have it written down here.
Yeah.
The amount I calculated was $5,155,700.
Correct.
Okay,
Same number I got.
okay. So, Mr. Walsh, do you want to make a motion on an amendment?
To amend the resolution in paragraphs 1, well, number 1 in the title of the resolution, and then after the resolve section in paragraph 1, 2, Exhibit A is going to have to be amended to the resolution, both after the word "to" at the top of page 4, and then in the totals after number 24, it will have to be amended to $4,687,000. The contingency in paragraph 25 would have to be amended to $468,700 to give a total on page 5 of $5,155,700.
Do I have a second to that motion? Mr. Bolito seconds it. The amendment is now before us. Questions, comments, concerns on this?
Well, I have the same concern as before, is that we're once again funding a full $5,155,700 when
Yep.
we have, I think based on the conversations we've had here, we know it's going to be a lot less. I think Mr. Bartlett correctly shed some light that it's not going to be 75%, so we know it's going to be some number north of the 1.2. You know, what that number is, it's just, you know, I guess I'm looking for, you know, I've not been on this board as long, you know, where I'm like to be cautious and not give the administration the full power to, you know, have a, you know, 75% more money than they might need. I'm also cognizant of the fact that the number has to be realistic too. But if this board's past practice is to give the full amount, I guess I could go along with it. So I guess I'm looking for some insight from some of the members who've been around for years before me.
Yep. Which, being that we've got a couple absences, I'm probably not the most tenured person here. Our past practice has been to fully fund the appropriation for some of the reasons that I think Mr. Cleary pointed out earlier this evening and Mr. Mayor pointed out from his tenure on the board. That said, this is different in the fact that we've never had a reimbursable percentage potential that was so high. Typically, we've dealt in reimbursement, except for grants, to be honest. I mean, grants have actually, we've had some grants that have been 100%, but I don't recall a $5 million grant coming our way that we had to approve, to be honest with you. And certainly, items that have fallen into that bucket have been more along the lines of school building projects, which have been in that 20 to 25% range that there was an anticipated reimbursement on. So this is, in fairness, because of the amount and because of the reimbursement percentage, a little bit of a different animal than what I've seen before. I don't know.
No, that's accurate. That's accurate.
And anybody else? Yeah, Mr. Bruckner.
Well, you know, I'm sympathetic to the concerns, but at
Yeah.
the same time, it sounds self-defeating to me. I mean, I guess at some point, you have to trust your professionals and the people who run the town. I think I think that, you know, questions were asked and issues were discussed, and there was some disagreement at the table, but in general, I think there seems to be a consensus on this, and it strikes me to be self-defeating because without approving it the way it's presented, with the slight amendment on the number we put on it, it sounds like it's going to hinder our ability to go forward with these projects, whether it's the ability to get people to bid on it or whatever the issue is, and therefore we could jeopardize the whole purpose of this is to get the FEMA reimbursement. I mean, that's the only reason we're moving so quickly with a large block of items. I mean, if there was no FEMA reimbursement whatsoever, my guess is we'd be a lot more cautious, we'd be a lot more selective, we might spread things out over several years where we could and so forth. And
Well, I might disagree with some of that because a lot of this we viewed as, in going through, mission critical.
no, I'm saying that we'd prefer to do it sooner rather than later, now.
Well, that's, yeah, but I'm not saying that.
Oh, you're saying we
because of
wouldn't
the-
necessarily do that, right?
I'm not saying it's because of the fee. The FEMA reimbursement obviously makes us
Well,
want to take advantage of it.
right, let me.
But some of those things are mission critical regardless of the
Yeah.
FEMA reimbursement.
Yeah, let me back up and just stop
Yeah.
where I was talking with
Yeah.
the FEMA. So I guess I'm just saying that, I've been here now, I guess, you told me this is going to be my fourth budget, so I guess I'm
It
sort
is.
of 3.5 years. And I hesitate to say this, I'm not concerned about what is being bandied about. I'm not saying it's something we shouldn't talk about, but I think that at the end of the day, we have fairly good checks and balances here in town. I think that we've been, unfortunately, because some things went, especially in the school projects, where, actually it was before my time, but I forget what the 2 schools and the,
Yeah.
whatever. And so I think our antennae are up more aggressively than they were in the past. I think we are on top of it. I think we're asking for regular reporting. I think Mr. Mayor alluded to the fact that nothing would you'd come back to us with a report before, I apologize, but I don't remember, but it was something that gave me some more assurance in terms of before the money would be spent or what the progress was with FEMA or whatever you were trying to.
Well, yeah, I remember, stating that it was certainly, that it was the intent and the commitment of the administration and of myself personally to, keep the board fully informed on all the activities. I imagine this will probably become a monthly report,
Right.
reporting item for a while.
Anyways, I guess I'm being long-winded. I'm supporting it as it's presented with concern, like anybody else, about the amount of money we're spending and it's unfortunate we had this horrible storm. Obviously, the best case would have been if nobody had suffered, both financially and, loss of property and some places loss of life. But unfortunately, that train's left the station, I think.
With this a large amount, I feel a lot better after getting some answers from Mr. Bartlett on what past practices have been, the confidence levels, and whatever. On the school projects, it's a lot easier, and no one looks at it because we've done so many school projects, and we see the way it works and whatever. We just don't get as many projects this large, and hopefully never will. But I understand what you're saying. But there's still part of my brain that remembers Metro Center and seeing signed agreements on that and find out that we're $6 million in the hole more on that, and it makes you question a lot of things.
In the past, one of the ways, and one of the bigger concerns that I have with this, look, we went through the items. The items are not ridiculous items. These are storm-related. Many of them are safety-related. Most of them are mission-critical priorities that need to be done before, or would like to be done before the next such occurrence presumably could happen. Hopefully not, but we said that last year. That said, the concern that I would have on this is with such a larger percentage of reimbursement and essentially our role being done after this evening, we get to authorize it once. I'd like to focus on buttoning down the language like we talked about earlier tonight. And I'm looking at Mr. Cleary for maybe some help so that we can ensure that the money is spent to the extent it needs to be spent for the specific result, which is to restore what we had and where necessary to be code compliant and to better safety issues as opposed to, new light fixtures and stuff of that sort, And so, as part of this amendment, I'd like to propose that we change the language in paragraph 1, and Mr. Cleary, if you could help me out here from...
one of the things that's coming out.
Could you go to the microphone?
There were a couple of items of improvements that really is the thing we have to define. I think everyone is in the one, bringing it up to code is a fairly easy concept. The one I'm unfamiliar with is the FEMA mitigation, that we're allowed certain enhancements
Right.
for durabilities.
Yeah, basically, FEMA looks at the cost of the repair, and they even factor in prior costs to the repair. So in simple numbers, if I'm looking at a $50,000 seawall, they'll give me up to $50,000 mitigation. But let's say the mitigation was gonna cost $65,000. If I can go back and show them that in Irene, we spent $20,000 on fixing it, then that ups the mitigation fund, because it's this year's repair and previous repairs. But again, in fairness to the way we've run the system, the town has often just rebuilt the infrastructure and not improved the infrastructure. And I think we've all learned that it's time to improve it, because we got hit, twice in a 12-month period, and the same results. I mean, basically, everything that washed out in Irene is washed out again.
Okay.
But it's a hard number to quantify, because they vary by project.
Mr. Polito has some thoughts on some language here. Can you? Read
Yes,
that?
and again, we'll defer to bond counsel to make sure we're in the right here, but the language I was banting about was where it says, with the projects to restore facilities, inserting language, something like this, to restore facilities, comma, including necessary improvements related to code compliance and compliance with current FEMA regulations, comma, and then continued damage by Hurricane Sandy. Would something like that do the trick?
I think so. I don't think that's broad enough.
I don't think so either.
Broad. Okay.
I
By the way, I don't want it so
I think it's a
broad.
really good start.
I know, but it's not, I know what you want, I think, but I don't think this is broad enough to get what we need and still be what you want, because what it doesn't include, Rob, is there might be, you got restoration to prior status.
Condition.
number
Right.
one, Prior condition. Then you have code issues. And then the third element that you may have on a given project is, because it's a damage related to the storm, it falls under section 406, which allows you to make structural improvements that will strengthen the facility and its ability to present itself to future storms.
Can I make a suggestion then? Simply, including but not limited to. And then, as I said, because what that would do is make our intent clear about what this is meant for and what it is not meant for, but it doesn't unnecessarily limit you in terms of what you need to do with the money.
But I don't want it.
But he doesn't want, but that doesn't satisfy Mr. Flynn,
Right.
because
I
it
don't
kind
want
of
it
makes it
not
too
limited
broad.
to. Exactly.
So I think what you want to add there is a sentence to for mitigation and structural improvements to, FEMA approved.
For future,
FEMA-approved structural improvements to enhance the facility, its ability to withstand further or future disaster events.
But we're really talking about that one section.
Right.
FEMA,
Right.
yeah, essentially what we're doing is saying if it's going to improve the integrity of the structure so that it helps it last another such event, then they should be allowed to do that. But what I don't want them to do is say, let's use the opportunity, we got so much in reimbursement from FEMA, let's use the opportunity to add another wing, right? I want to say, no, that's not going to happen. There's not going to be any running
For the
around
record,
here.
FEMA wouldn't let you do that anyway.
No, I'm not saying they would, but the thing is, the $5 million is what
That's
they're
why I
talking
put the
about.
language FEMA approved.
Right.
Okay, let me throw this out then, all right? To restore facilities, comma, including necessary improvements related to co-compliance, compliance with current FEMA regulations, and FEMA-approved preventative enhancements.
That works for me, is that for?
Work for you,
How
Mr.
about
Chairman?
FEMA improved structural improvements instead of enhancements?
FEMA approved preventative structural enhancements.
Yes.
Good?
Or structural
Well,
improvements?
I don't know, what happens if it's not a structural improvement, but it's an improvement? I'd keep it a little broader than
Yeah,
that.
it's the same improvement.
Okay.
All right, so FEMA improved preventative enhancements.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
You guys are getting this for
Because
free.
it's FEMA approved. All right, so, can you make, I want to make
We-
the motion that we
Can I
have.
ask one question,
Yeah.
which might just prevent further motions down the line?
Okay.
Because
Right.
there's one other area I think that we haven't covered, which is,
Well, let me amend the amendment. but-
well, I'm gonna, maybe
Go
I
ahead.
can add it to his.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
that's what I'm wondering. And I guess this is a question for Mr. Bartlett, is what happens if it's, say, the dredging project? If FEMA comes in and says, no, they negotiate with you and you guys all look at the data and they say, no, we're not gonna pay for the whole dredging project. We see data here that shows that some more stuff came in after the storm, and we're not gonna pay for that. But what the town of Fairfield still wants to pay, since we're doing the dredging project and we're doing it now, why don't we just pay for it? And it makes sense to do it all at one time. Under this,
Right.
it's not covered. We couldn't do, you can't do that. You can't do that part of the project, right, Mr. Cleary? Because this is some other stuff that happened post-Sandy.
Or you can say, or structural improvement.
But that's not I wouldn't know if that was structural.
Infrastructure.
Well, infrastructure.
Yeah, infrastructure improvement. We try it again, Rob?
I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
if we're going to do the whole thing, we cover it, be as
When you
broad-based
finish
as
writing that,
possible.
just give it to me.
Right.
I want to do it right, and I want to be able to do, I mean, if we're going to do the dredging project, let's just do the dredging
Do
project.
we want to say
And I understand.
related infrastructure improvements or necessary infrastructure improvements to make it more specific?
Related
Related.
infrastructure,
Yeah,
because you
related
can't say
different
it's necessary, because they
Right,
could
okay.
theoretically just do.
All right, I'm ready to give this a go, guys.
Necessary can be
All right.
subjective.
That's what you said last time.
Well, then Jim threw something, but it was a good point. All right,
He has his moments.
let me throw it out there.
Jenny doesn't agree.
Let me throw it out there first, and then I can make the formal amendment, but I just want to make sure we got the language right, so we don't have to do this more than 3 times. All right, to restore facilities, comma, including necessary improvements related to code compliance, compliance with current FEMA regulations, comma, FEMA-approved preventative enhancements, and related infrastructure improvements. That sound about right for everybody?
Yes.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so I will make the motion then.
I will second it,
Yeah.
that we
Further-
amend the amendment.
Yes.
You accept the friendly amendment?
Yes, I do.
All right. So the amendment, the bond resolution is before us as amended, with the numbers changed to 5,155,700, and with the additional restrictive language added in paragraph 1 as to what those funds can be used for. Do we have any questions, comments from board members?
Don't we have to vote on the amendment first?
We are.
That's what we're
That's
doing.
going now?
We're doing that.
Any questions, comments on the amendments? Anybody from the public? Back to the board. All in favor of adding the amendment, changing the amount to 5,155,700, and adding the language in section 1 to read?
Including necessary improvements related to code compliance, compliance with current FEMA regulations, FEMA-approved preventative enhancements, and related infrastructure improvements.
Is the addition. All in favor of the amendment? Those opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. The item as amended, the bond resolution as amended is now before us. Any other discussion? None. Back to the public? None. I'm going to call for a vote on this.
Yes.
All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That's it. Do we have another motion?
To adjourn?
Do you have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Brockfeld. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you, everybody.
Let me write it down between